Call the meeting to order. Celeste, please call the roll.
Bates.
Here.
Evans. Here. Kasserag.
Here.
Mead.
Here.
Rittenhouse.
Here.
Slivka.
Here.
Stocking.
Here.
Quorum.
All right, thank you. Next item on the agenda is approval of this evening's agenda.
Move to approve. Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so we have one item on our docket tonight, public hearing for the zoning text amendments. It's a request for text amendments to Chapter 2 definitions, Chapter 3 general zoning provisions, and Chapter 4A downtown districts, Chapter 6 office and commercial districts, Chapter 7 office, research, and industrial districts, and Chapter 11 off-street parking and loading, traffic and access regulations of Title 11 zoning of the City of Geneva City Code related to regulation of recreation and medical cannabis use. And the applicant is the City of Geneva. So this evening, I'll go through our procedure so everybody's on the same page as we move forward. We are now entering the public portion of our meeting. It is the Planning and Zoning Commission's job to conduct these public hearings or receive testimony for and against petitions for general amendments to the zoning ordinance, zoning map amendments, zoning text amendments, special use permits, amendments to special permits, and to consider requests for variations from the strict application of the City of Geneva zoning ordinance. We will proceed as follows. First, the Planning and Zoning Commission Secretary or designated representative will read and describe written items, reports, plans into the record. Second, the petitioner will present testimony in favor of the petition and will present any supporting plans or exhibits. Third, the commission members will have an opportunity to question the petitioner. Fourth, the commission will then receive citizen testimony both for and against the petition. Questions about the proposal may be directed to the petitioner or petitioner's witnesses, and questions about the Planning and Zoning Commission process itself may be directed to me. Following such testimony, the petitioner and the Planning and Zoning Commission may ask for questions for those who testify. Finally, the petitioner may provide rebuttal to any testimony in opposition. When all testimony is brought into the record, the hearing will be closed, and the Planning and Zoning Commission will make a recommendation to City Council in the form of motion or motions. In order to give testimony, you must provide your name and address on the registration sheet as you walked in of the hearing room, signed in the space provided. By signing the registration sheet, you agree that you understand that anything you say will be considered sworn testimony and affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. When giving testimony, please approach the lectern, speak directly into the microphone so you may be heard. Please begin by stating your name and giving your address. If you speak additional times, please state your name each time for the record. Please be concise when presenting your testimony, and if your point has already been made, it is not necessary to repeat it. Each of these points is recorded and will be considered as the Planning and Zoning Commission develops its findings of fact and recommendation or recommendations. You may provide written testimony, but such testimony must be presented to the Zoning and Planning Commission Secretary or designated representative prior to the close of the hearing. After the process is completed and everyone wishing to present testimony has spoken, the commission will then decide whether it's heard adequate testimony in order to make a decision. If it has, the public hearing will be closed. After public hearing is closed, the Planning and Zoning Commission will refrain from receiving any additional testimony either for or against the petition. There is one exception to this rule. City staff will submit a report based on the testimony presented at the hearing. This report will consider all comments or concerns from all city departments such as the Fire Department, Public Works Department, and Engineering Department. Okay, is everyone clear on how we're going to proceed? Any questions? Okay, at this time I will administer the oath to those who have signed the registration form. Anyone wishing to give sworn testimony or ask questions or cross-examine anyone given sworn testimony, please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear and affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the whole truth and nothing but the truth? I do. Thank you. Please be seated. Prior to the start of this hearing, I'd like to just kind of go through the procedure and kind of clarify what we're trying to do tonight. The Planning and Zoning Commission, time to time, we meet and review land use and zoning matters brought before the petitioners as directed by City Council. Tonight, we have been asked by the City Council to consider potential text amendments to our land use and zoning ordinance to designate potentially appropriate areas within the city zoning districts for licensed medical cannabis business and/or recreational cannabis business. Importantly, tonight is a zoning and land use discussion only. It is not within our preview or jurisdiction to discuss the overall proprietary or the medical, whether it's reasonable to do it in town. And we don't have anything to do with the legalization of cannabis generally. Okay, it's a council's decision at the end of the day, whether we do it or not. Effective January 1, 2020, the state of Illinois has changed the law and legalized cannabis. Therefore, the City Council has requested that we review our zoning and land use ordinances for potential sites for legal businesses. The City of Geneva has yet to take an official position on what the city will do, opt out entirely, meaning no medical or recreational cannabis business may transact within Geneva, or determine if the city will permit medical cannabis and/or recreational cannabis business in designated areas only. Again, it is not the right meeting to offer opinions about whether it's a bad thing that medical or recreational cannabis is legal, or whether Geneva should permit such businesses within the city confines. That is not for today, but for a future city council meeting likely in December. Today, it is only about zoning and land use, so please be respectfully request that all comments be directed to various proposed text amendments and other zoning land use items introduced at this meeting. We ask that all comments stay clear from the larger arguments or pros and cons of medical recreational cannabis, because that is not our preview. We don't have authority in that area. We do have authority on recommending text amendments or changes to the zoning ordinance. We want to stay focused on relevant land use and zoning matters only. I hope that you will respect these guidelines. Obviously, if the public comments get beyond the scope of review, we ask that such commentary be concluded so that we can have a streamlined and relevant meeting as possible. So I thank everybody in advance for their cooperation in this. But I think it's very clear to start with that whether we allow it in town or not is a council's decision. And then after they get past that part, then it's where it can locate within the community and how via the zoning ordinance. And that's what we're going to be talking about. Okay? Thank you for your time on that. Paul, will you please read the record?
All right. Contents of our Planning and Zoning Commission file is an application for a zoning ordinance text amendment submitted by the Community Development Department, a PowerPoint presentation provided during the Committee of the Whole policy discussion on September 23rd, 2019, minutes of the Committee of the Whole policy discussion on September 23rd, 2019 regarding cannabis uses, Compassionate Use of Medical Cannabis Program Act 098-0122, Cannabis Regulation Tax Act, Public Act 101-0027, Adult Use Cannabis Resources from the Illinois Municipal League, documentation from Susan George received November 7, 2019, documentation from John and Mary Lou O'Halloran received November 7, 2019, letter from Vic Portencaso dated November 9, 2019, a staff report from the Community Development Department to the Planning and Zoning Commission, which summarizes the request and provides staff's analysis dated November 14, 2019, zoning maps for cannabis business establishments depicting buffers from schools, daycares, residentially zoned property, and other cannabis businesses, a PowerPoint presentation prepared for tonight's public hearing, and a certificate of publication from the Daily Herald for the legal notice that was published on October 30th, 2019 for tonight's public hearing.
Thank you very much. David, we'll hear from you.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, everybody. As stated a moment ago, the Planning and Zoning Commission's charge this evening is to provide a recommendation to the City Council on where cannabis uses, the mic not up?
I think it's
All right. Where cannabis uses may be appropriate within the City of Geneva. And there may be operational standards that are consistent with the act that the Plan Commission may recommend as well. So my presentation here this evening will focus on that matter after a very brief overview of kind of what brought us here tonight. So the state of Illinois recently passed the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act, which legalized possession and consumption of cannabis by adults 21 and over for recreational use. Illinois was the first state to do so through legislative action, where the others were done by referendum. Key components of the act are, of course, the legalization for use and possession, but rapid and controlled expansion of cultivation centers and dispensaries, providing for new cannabis businesses, giving local municipalities some zoning authority, and then state and local taxation opportunities. It also builds upon the medical cannabis law prior to the recently passed Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act. The state had the Compassionate Use of Medical Cannabis Program Act. That was initially passed as a pilot program, and then it has since been made a permanent program. The city never adopted any amendments to address medical cannabis, so we're recommending changes to the ordinance tonight to address that as well. Just to give you an idea on the timing, it's effective immediately. The first legal sales will be allowed as of January 1st, 2020. There's no legal consumption until there's a legal means to purchase. Existing cultivation centers and dispensaries within the state will be eligible for like an early approval license to grow and sell from either their existing location or to open up a secondary location, like a retail storefront dispensary. They estimate on the potential day one retail market, there would be 100 dispensaries statewide. I think there were 75 in our region, and it's estimated that before May 1st, 2020, there would be at least 47 dispensing organizations within our region. Wow. Just kind of continuing on the timeline, you can see it kind of moves quickly. After that May 1st deadline, they'll start issuing licenses for infusers and craft growers and transporters, and then an additional 75 dispensing organization licenses. And then by January of 2022, the state can either raise the number of dispensing licenses it has and craft grower licenses it has, or decide to keep it as is. Some of those uses I just rattled off we'll get into in a little bit more detail, but just kind of a high-level overview is a cultivation center can be up to 210,000 square feet, and that can cultivate, dry, cure, and package cannabis. Craft growers can perform the same operations, but can only be up to 5,000 square feet. Dispensary can sell cannabis, edibles, and other cannabis products. A processor can extract cannabis concentrate and incorporate cannabis concentrate into a product. An infuser can only really do the infusing of that concentrate into a product. Then a transporter, self-explanatory, transporting the goods between those uses. The licensing of cannabis businesses will be exclusive to the state. The city will not have the ability to license these businesses. The Act provides municipalities the ability to regulate cannabis businesses through zoning, which is why we're here this evening. A state license can be denied if the business is not properly zoned within the municipality that it's seeking to operate in. So what authority do we have through zoning? We can outright ban any and all cannabis businesses by ordinance, just completely prohibit them. We can enact reasonable zoning regulations for cannabis businesses that do not conflict with the Act, but that includes limiting the overall number of businesses, as some other communities have done. We can require a special use permit for cannabis businesses and impose time, place, manner, and number restrictions on those operations. We can prohibit and regulate cannabis businesses from having on-premise consumption of products. We can locally regulate consumption in a manner consistent with the Act, not in public places. Can impose a municipal cannabis retailers' occupation tax. But what we cannot do is unreasonably prohibit home grow that is consistent with the medical cannabis program, and we cannot unreasonably prohibit the use of cannabis. So even if we prohibit it within the city's limits, it does not mean you can't possess and use in the city's limits. You just can't purchase or run a business. So what actions has the city taken this far? On September 23rd, the Committee of the Whole of the City Council held a policy discussion regarding the city's options for the local regulation of cannabis uses. At the end of that meeting, the committee directed staff to schedule this public hearing and prepare text amendments related to the regulation of cannabis uses for consideration by this commission, seeking recommendations on if it were to be allowed, where might it be appropriate and under what conditions. And then on November 4th, the Committee of the Whole recommended approval of an ordinance imposing a 3% municipal cannabis retailer's occupation tax that would be considered by the council should the city decide to permit cannabis businesses. So that brings us to the proposed zoning ordinance amendments that are before you this evening. This is just kind of a high-level summary of the 5 categories. We have adding each cannabis use to the ordinance and defining the term, permitting cannabis dispensing organizations as a special use in the DCM, DRSCM, B1, B5. That should be B4, that's a typo. B1, B4, and B5 business districts. Permit all cannabis business establishments as a special use in the I1 and I2 industrial districts. Establish parking requirements for each type of business. And then establish use standards for cannabis businesses, including the prohibition of on-premise consumption of cannabis, separation requirements from other cannabis uses, separation requirements from schools, daycares, and residentially zoned properties. So the proposal is to allow each use as a special use somewhere within the limits of the city of Geneva, and we'll get into that in more detail. If the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council decides not to allow any of these uses, it is still important and necessary to define the terms. Defining each use will remove any ambiguity about whether or not a certain type of business is permitted either within that zoning district or within the city. If a use is defined and not listed as a permitted or special use in the district, it's clearly not allowed. And if it's not listed in any zoning district in the city, it's clearly not allowed. If it's not defined, cannabis uses could be considered under general use categories such as warehousing, processing, packaging, or retail sales for dispensaries, and would be permitted underneath those general categories without any additional regulations. So it's important to define the terms no matter which way the city goes. Additionally, if there's any proposed changes to regulations in the future, it's nice to have the terms already defined and know what we're talking about. This is a section 11.3-14 would be a new section that we would add to our general zoning provisions that would be specific to cannabis business uses. And this would establish additional operational standards that must be met in order to be considered for a special use. The first is simple, that a cannabis business establishment must provide proof of their licensing prior to operation. The second is prohibiting any on-premise consumption of cannabis at any sort of business establishment. The third is that a recreational cannabis craft grower cannot be located within 1,500 feet of another craft grower or a cultivation center, whether it's medical or recreational. The fourth is that it cannot be, dispensing organization cannot be located within 1,500 feet of another dispensing organization. And the next one is that a cultivation center, whether it's recreational or medical, cannot be located within 2,500 feet of a property line of a public or private school, elementary or secondary school, daycare, group home, child care facility, or residential zoning district. Those last 3 standards are all required by the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act. Repeating them within the zoning ordinance allows us to make sure that we're checking to make sure there's no violation there when we're considering a special use. So those are not unique to the city of Geneva. Those are statewide requirements, but we're just kind of for redundancy and being able to check it, including it in our regulations. This last one, letter F, is any sort of cannabis business establishment shall not be located within 150 feet of the property line of a school, daycare, childcare facility, or residential zoning district, providing approximately a half a block buffer between cannabis business uses and these other uses. Requiring a special use permit will require a public hearing before this Planning and Zoning Commission. That process includes mail notification to all property owners within 500 feet. Section 1114 4F of the zoning ordinance establishes these 9 special use standards that must be found in the affirmative in order for the Planning and Zoning Commission to make a positive recommendation to the City Council and for the City Council to adopt an application. And those 9 standards I know you all are familiar with, but for the benefit of the audience, I'll just go over them briefly. The first is that it has to be consistent with the city's comprehensive plan. So is this a use that is typically considered for this location? The building or use will not diminish the value of adjacent nearby properties, so they have to provide evidence that it will not. Will not substantially or unduly increase traffic congestion, and on-street parking demand in the area. So there has to be adequate ingress and egress to the site, adequate parking. That kind of ties into number 4 as well. The 5th is that it will not adversely affect or change the character of the area, so the use is not out of character for other uses that are permitted in the district. It will not adversely affect the use and development of adjacent nearby properties. There's adequate utilities, drainage, and parking and other facilities to service the use in place. It otherwise complies with the city's zoning regulations, and then the architectural appeal and function is in keeping with the character of the surrounding buildings. So each one of those has to be found in the affirmative for a special use to be recommended for approval. In addition to meeting those standards, the state does have some operational standards for dispensing organizations. And this is not a comprehensive list, but gives you just an idea of what other types of regulations are already in place. They cannot sell alcohol. They cannot accept deliveries in a public area. It has to be a designated restricted access area. They have limited hours of operation between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. Dispensaries cannot produce and manufacture cannabis. Cannot sell to anyone under 21, cannot have drive-throughs or vending machines, no delivery to customers. They must have video surveillance, point-of-sale equipment, must have the state's cannabis electronic verification system, must have at least 2 people working at all times, and some of these we've touched on already. They can't be within 1,500 feet of another dispensing organization. So, kind of going section by section on where we're proposing to allow these organizations by special use. The first is section 11.4A-4. This is the table of permitted and special uses that was recently adopted for the downtown area. We're proposing to allow both medical and recreational dispensing organizations as a special use in the residentially scaled commercial mixed-use district and the DCM commercial mixed-use district. I'm just going to try to zoom in here. See, everything in red is part of the buffer zone, that 150-foot buffer from residential properties, daycares, and schools. So that leaves kind of this lighter red color as potential areas in the DCM and RSCM district where a dispensing organization may be permitted. The yellow ring represents 1,500 feet. So you could see that unless you located on opposite ends of the downtown area, you likely wouldn't be able to have a proliferation or cluster in any section of the downtown, allowing them as a special use in those districts. Increasing the buffer beyond that 150 feet would eliminate virtually all the properties probably in the residentially scaled commercial mixed-use district, and will leave you kind of just with this core center along State Street and maybe a little bit north and south on 3rd Street.
So David, that's 150 feet, the circle, is that what you said?
No, the circle is 1,500 feet.
Okay.
The red is a 150-foot buffer
Okay.
from the residential and schools. Let's see if I can navigate this now. Okay. The second proposal, again, is to allow dispensing organizations as a special use in the B1, B4, and B5 business districts. Again, with that same 150-foot buffer. When we look at where those districts are located, B5 is primarily along Randall Road. Again, those yellow rings represent that 1,500-foot of separation that would be required. We have a little bit of B4 on the south side of Kesslinger. We have some B1 on Kesslinger and Peck. That is a church campus now. And then we've got Geneva Commons. Then we've got a little bit over State and Brisher by the Walgreens, is some B1 properties may be eligible. A little bit more B4 on East State Street as you get towards East Side Drive, and then further east towards Kirk Road, you have some B1 and B4 zoning there as well. Again, the commission and the council can further restrict beyond that 1,500 feet or just limit the overall number of dispensing organizations that they're willing to consider. We mapped it out to show that reasonable buffer from residential uses and other sensitive uses, but also just tried to show that there really can't be a proliferation in any one of these zones given that 1,500-foot buffer. So then we propose to allow all cannabis uses in the I-1 and I-2 industrial districts. This would be cultivation centers, dispensing organizations, infusers, processing, and transporting organizations. And this map focuses just on those industrial areas. I'm trying to zoom in a little closer again. So we have some off of Randall and approximately Fargo, where old Caneville used to come through. We have some on Gary Lane, just south of South Street. And then you can see in each one of those zones, you likely wouldn't be able to have more than one. We have some more I-1 zoning further east on South Street at Western Avenue. Some I-1 zoning on South Batavia, right before you hit Fabian Parkway, just north of the Campana building. And then we have some behind the McDonald's, south of the McDonald's on East State Street off of Glengarry. Then we have the industrial park in the northeast section of town off of Averill and Couts. There's also the potential for the city to annex property in the southeast area that is in our planning area, and we are actively trying to annex properties in that area for industrial development. So if that is annexed and zoned, there could be potential for additional uses in that area. This final map is that 2,500-foot buffer from schools, daycares, and residential zoning districts that's required by the Act for cultivation centers. You can see when you apply that in our community, all but virtually one or two properties here are eliminated from consideration. Those properties may also be eliminated from consideration if we factor in the residential zoning in our neighboring community to the north. So there's very limited opportunity within the city for a cultivation center. There may be some additional opportunity, again, if we annex those properties in the southeast area. As we do with all uses, we have to assign a parking requirement to each use. When we looked at dispensing organizations, we looked at this as a very similar to any other retail sales, and the typical parking ratio we use there is 4 per 1,000, 4 spaces for every 1,000 square feet of gross floor area. So that's what we're recommending for dispensing organizations in any zoning district. Then the other uses, craft growers, cultivation centers, infusers, and processing centers are very similar to other types of industrial uses we have that manufacture, process, package, warehouse, and ship various products. And we're proposing to use the same parking standards we have for those uses. And then finally, we have the transporting organizations. Most of our transportation uses that we allow, we have the same requirement that the parking requirement will be determined by the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council with the application of a special use. That's because transportation facilities are so variable in their size. So once we have a proposal before us, we can understand exactly how many vehicles they would have and what type of operation they'd be working with, so we can recommend the required parking at that time. Included in your packets was just a brief summary on what some of the other municipalities' responses to the act have been. Like Geneva, many communities are in the midst of discussion. Some have proposed amendments and are moving through the public hearing process. Others have had only conceptual conversations with their council or board. A few communities have taken action to actually ban cannabis business establishments or adopt zoning regulations to allow them. Based on our research, we've got the 5 that we found that have definitely passed ordinances to allow them. St. Charles to the north is one of those, and they included some limitations, 1 on each side of the community, and they have to be 250 feet away from schools, daycares, and residentially zoned properties. Elburn adopted regulations to allow 1 dispensing organization by special use with 150-foot separation from schools and daycares. Both of those communities do prohibit the on-site consumption of cannabis products.
So they do?
They prohibit that. Yeah.
So they prohibit it?
Right. We have 6 municipalities that have taken action to prohibit cannabis business establishments, and we also have just kind of summarize leanings that have been kind of publicly stated based on council meetings so far of other communities, either to permit or prohibit. So I'm sorry if I ran through that. I do have all of those maps we could take a closer look at. I do have other maps too that I've created that show different buffer distances from 150 feet to 250 to 500, so on. But again, just a summary. The amendments that are before you are to define each term that is included in your packet. To permit cannabis dispensing organizations as a special use in the DCM, DRSCM, B1, B4, and B5 districts. Permit all cannabis business uses as special uses in the industrial districts. Establish parking requirements for each type of use, and then to establish use standards, including prohibiting on-premise consumption, separation requirements from other cannabis businesses, and separation requirements from schools, daycares, and residentially zoned properties. So with that, I'll open it up for questions or discussion.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
John?
So David, I think I heard you say we can be more restrictive than the distances listed in the act, right?
Right.
The 1,500 feet, if we went to 2,000 feet or 2,500, that would, it further limits geographically what can be done here, but we are able to do that if we so deem to, right?
Right.
Okay. I would personally like to see some of the map variations you did with different buffers, just to see.
Sure. Trying to close out of this. I don't know what I did wrong here. So that's 150 feet.
Right.
This is 250 feet. Right, missing here. All right, so the 250 feet, as you look at the downtown area, you can see it really eliminates the residentially scaled commercial mixed use. There may be one or two properties now that are eligible there.
Really only at pretty much Third and State Street.
Yeah, you really kind of get into the core of the downtown at 3rd and State Street.
And that's a different question as well. Are we able, if we define buffers and locations, are we able to, if we find it collectively that we want to, could we say we don't want it in the center of town?
Yeah.
That's something you could do, because you could define the DCM, right? So.
Right, you can choose which zoning districts you feel it is or is not appropriate in. Either as a permitted use or special use. We've recommended a special use because we've also recommended the additional use standards.
Right.
Certainly, the commission does not have to impose additional use standards. You could allow them as permitted uses in the zoning districts if that was your choice. But that's what 250 feet does in the downtown area. When you get out to Randall Road, that buffer starts to creep across from like the Pepper Valley subdivision into Geneva Commons, and it really kind of eliminates all those outlots along the frontage. Additionally, behind Geneva Commons, you have residential development, so that kind of eliminates all the stores lining the western edge of that. So really, when you get past that 150 feet, you can kind of faintly see those light gray property lines.
Right.
All the businesses are kind of loaded on the western edge, and these are all parking fields. You really start to limit the opportunities in those districts. The same for the industrial districts. You can see the buffers kind of converge here.
Right.
Off of Gary Lane.
Here's a silly question. When you're measuring 150 feet or 250 feet, is it to the property line of the property that it's located on, or is it to the demised premises that are rented or
I
housing
looked
the
at it as
business?
the property line to property line.
The property line. So basically, are you eliminating Geneva Commons in totality, because that's one property, right?
Right. I mean, there's several parcels within there.
Right. There's the Dix is separate. And
Yeah, but for the most part, yeah, there's two large parcels and the outlots. It should be noted too that most of the development along Randall Road is in a planned unit development, and most of those planned unit developments already have their established use lists. So if they are interested in considering a cannabis use, they would have to come and petition
Okay.
the commission anyway to amend that use list. And then that might not be all of them, but many of them do have those use lists established. Yes,
David, this is for all uses.
right.
Okay. So if we wanted to vary it, say we wanted to treat dispensing businesses differently from, say, an infuser, we could change that, because like for some of these industrial areas, like that one down on Gary Lane, we might not want to have a dispensary down there. There is residential not far from there, but it's an existing industrial area, and a business that wanted to do something more in the wholesale end of it might not be as objectionable. So we could have a buffer of 150 for some uses and 250 for others, or 500 or whatever.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
And we can pick and choose really any of those uses which we feel are appropriate for the city, and we can permit some and not permit others, and we can vary those regulations as we see fit.
And the charge to pick which businesses we will opt in and out of, that's the city council's job. We're to assume that all three types of businesses are going to be allowed, and how would we want the zoning to look if that was the case?
And if there's really not a area in town that you feel it is compatible, that can certainly be part of your recommendation.
Right.
Yes, John.
Sorry, this sounds cynical, but is this the cart before the horse? I mean, we're spending all this time, and we're gonna decide what zones, and then the city council comes in and says, we're not gonna do it. I guess my question is, based on your experience with all those towns that have opted out, did they take it to their planning board first and say, give us the areas, and then they went to the city and said, the city's like, now we're out?
No, I think the city council in our discussion had the opportunity to say, we're directing staff to provide an ordinance to prohibit the uses, and they didn't take that opportunity. They instead requested that we have this public hearing and consider and further evaluate where it might be able to be located in the city and under what conditions. So I feel like they wanted to have that informed discussion before they made their final decision. So I don't know, that's really the cart before the horse. Many communities have done it that way too, where they've had kind of the policy discussion with the council, and then they've gone through the public hearing process before a formal vote was taken.
To me, this is a tremendous amount of information, and we're 6 weeks, 7 weeks before the end of the year. So I don't know how rational of a decision the city council can make with all this. I mean, this is a lot of information, like 6 or 7 different licenses. I don't know a lot about this topic, but I mean, it seems like a lot to absorb.
I'd agree. It was a lot to absorb and put together.
David, to add on to what John was saying, I mean, we started out by saying we are not here to, to say, yes, we're going to allow this or not in Geneva, but essentially you're saying we can say we don't want it in the downtown district, we don't want it here, if we say we don't want it anywhere, basically we are saying we don't want to approve it. I'm not saying that that's what we would do, but, I mean, do we have the power to say no? We don't think any of these businesses should be cited anywhere in the town?
You have the power to make that recommendation if you feel it's really not a compatible use with other uses in that zoning district. I think that the challenge with this is taking what the product is out of the equation and looking at what the use is. It's the sale of a legal product that has been legalized by the state. Is it all that different from other retail sales if it's a dispensing organization? Is the manufacturing of that product all that different from the manufacturing of other products, or the processing of food that we allow in industrial districts? So I think looking at what zones it might be appropriate in, that's the approach we tried to take, was kind of take the debate over the product out of it.
Well, I would say clearly it is different, because there are plenty of communities that are deciding not to do it. I mean, we should add Batavia onto that, because I believe that they've at least tabled it for a year as of the other night. That's what I heard. I don't know.
Federally illegal still.
To Terry's point, I do think you have all these restrictions by the state saying it's got to be 250 foot from a school, but if it's just like any other retail organization, why is there restrictions?
Well, that's a requirement for the cultivation centers, but for dispensing organizations, there is no buffer requirement set forth by the state from residential areas or the schools. It's only from other dispensing organizations.
Michael?
And there are other uses that the state regulates and has similar type of restrictions, correct? So this isn't the only use.
I'm not familiar with other
Liquor, for
liquor.
example.
Difference with liquors, we have the ability to license that, which we don't have with cannabis.
David, how do what you've recommended here for locations for dispensing, and I think dispensing is different than the other kinds of businesses we're talking about, compare to the way we regulate a liquor store in terms of where they can locate?
So with the liquor store, trying to pull that map up. Yeah. So with the liquor store, we require a special use for liquor stores. So it's similar in that manner. We have a 100-foot separation, I think, in our licensing requirements from churches, schools, and daycares for liquor stores. So pretty similar in that regard, with 150 feet and a special use requirement. We don't have a separation requirement, though, for liquor stores.
And then the other question, as I recall, all these different uses had to have a certain distance from each other as well as from the other kinds of uses like residential or school or whatever. So if you had, say, an industrial area where you were going to allow all of the uses, they couldn't truly all locate there. Is that correct? Because
Right.
they would have to be a certain distance from each other, so even though you allowed them all, you're still maybe have one of them that ended up there.
Right, so, I mean, again, we can only have cultivation centers potentially in the northeast corner, and maybe once we annex the southeast corner. So we won't have cultivation centers anywhere else. It's craft growers cannot be within 1,500 feet of another craft grower, and dispensing organizations cannot be within 1,500 feet of another dispensing organization. There's nothing that says they can't be within 1,500 feet of each other, though.
Okay.
So you could have all three uses in the Northeast Industrial Park, theoretically.
Theoretically.
Or downtown, I guess. Well, no, because those aren't.
No, 'cause those are-
Those are not allowed in.
Yeah, it's only recommended for dispensing organizations.
And then some of them are allowed also as co-locate in the same building, but they have to be separate within the building. So there, you're gonna get some of that could happen too.
Kind of vertical integration.
So each one of these, we have to look at the 9 guidelines?
Right, so if an application was filed, it would come before this commission for a public hearing, and we would look at the 9 special use standards.
But do we need to do that tonight in order to go through what we're going through?
No.
We don't. We just have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, it's just a site-specific requirement.
Got it.
It would allow us to review each application on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
Brad?
I just was wondering if you guys at staff have talked about the special use of the character of the surrounding area. I mean, I think this is a pretty big cultural change, and so that's going to be a hard standard for anybody to meet. I'm just wondering if you guys have talked about that or not.
We really haven't. There's not, I mean, to some extent, I guess we have, but I think it's, again, taking away what they're selling. And there's 100 stores I walk by and don't care for what they sell.
Yeah.
Don't go in. So it's again, the actual use and how is that impacting other uses in the district? Is it one more reason to come to the district, or is it a reason to stay away from the district?
I understand what John is saying, but I mean, for me, in my head, I think simplifying it a little bit helped me a little bit, kind of figure it out with cultivating. And then, to me, all the other uses besides dispensary are just like light manufacturing, kind of.
I'd agree.
And cultivation's kind of almost off the table, practically. So that's, we talk about that a little bit, but to me, whether you're an infuser or craft grower or whatever, I feel like that's all just like light industrial manufacturing. And then I think kind of the bigger discussion maybe for us and for the public is in the dispensary. So I don't find it as overwhelming when you think about that. You take out whether, I mean, for me, whether it's medical or recreational, it's the same. I mean, I'm assuming we have to define them separately for state purposes. That's why we do
For
that.
consistency with the act, right?
But in the end, we're going to allow it to be grown, a craft grower. I don't personally have any difference whether it's grown for medical uses or recreational uses. So, I don't know, I'm just throwing that out there to maybe help.
I think that's helpful, Brad. It's
Yeah.
helpful way to look at that. Maybe a way to discuss it would be to take each of those 3 categories and talk about how we feel about locating each of
Right.
them, rather than continuing to look at it as an overwhelming whole category.
Am I correct now? I mean, so now that, as of January 1st, are there still strictly medical dispensaries as well, or are those gone? Do they all fall under the same?
I think they're separate.
They have changed some of the regulation regarding medical dispensaries, but not all of it. So there still is some separation.
So communities could still choose to only allow medical.
I think we have to provide some provision for medical within the zoning ordinance.
Okay,
But again, a cultivation center for medical is not likely, given the buffer requirements for that.
But there would still be dispensaries that were just medical.
because prior to this, St. Charles had a medical dispensary, right?
Correct,
Now they're adding the two residential, or the two retail.
right.
So David, I appreciate your doing the zones and what's possible in terms of distribution and stuff, but there's no, the council could over on top of this, regardless of what we act on, just set a limit, right? There's no, they can just say we're only gonna allow two types of uses, two dispensaries in it, regardless of the zoning ordinance. So that would control first, and then if we ran out of two, then that's it.
I think that would be probably worked into the zoning ordinance as a restriction,
That's how we would do it.
right?
They would come in and by edict saying we're only gonna allow two.
I think that would, just for transparency's sake too, for people looking to locate, they would understand that there can be no more than two in this zoning
So that
district
to
or in
give
this.
them notice that that's the setup, and then they need to
Right.
confer with you to figure out whether we have to or not.
Right,
And we could also recommend that, too, right?
Yeah, but again, that's kind of just, again, they have the ability to do that on top of whatever
Right.
we do.
Right.
I mean, or not do, I mean, depending on how we do it, but, yeah, I mean, again, I think the demonstration is good because it kind of sees spatially, it's kind of very, very difficult, but yet they could still go in there and say, we're not even gonna put it to that chance, we're just gonna say it's two in the community. That's it, end of story.
I mean, with kind of high demand, I guess, for dispensaries, this is every location you could put a dispensary and keep that 1,500-foot buffer from another dispensary. I don't know if that kind of demand is real.
Yeah.
And then this map shows every location where you could have one of the more industrial uses, including dispensaries. So you're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Yeah.
I guess you could potentially get 7 in there.
Yeah, I mean, from my personal perspective, the production facilities aren't that troublesome for me as opposed to the dispensaries.
Okay.
We all feel that way. Question? So if you put in these buffers and they're fairly substantial, say, and one of them is from a residential area, or it could be something else too, and at the time that we create these rules, the cannabis-related businesses are allowed in a certain area, and then someone comes in and say there's a vacant piece of property and they want to rezone it for a residential project or something that would then put it within that buffer, what happens then?
I think it would be a pre-existing residential area.
So the new.
Same question about
so you-
daycares, kind of.
Right.
So you could come in with that new use, but you would do it knowing that you were within that closer proximity?
I know that question had crossed my mind, and I thought I addressed it in the language. I'm trying to make sure that I did now. But it was, yeah, a pre-existing use.
Okay, so it wouldn't prohibit somebody, say, from opening a daycare within the buffer area, as long as they did it knowing that they were within that buffer area? Or would they be prohibited from opening a new daycare that was within a certain,
Question. I don't know if this city can knowingly violate their own ordinance.
If it's already a
Yeah,
permitted use, so.
I have
they
it, I have
could.
it worded as pre-existing,
Yeah.
so it can't be located within a pre-existing public.
I guess I'm
school
looking at it
daycare.
from the other way. I'm looking at it to preserve flexibility,
Yeah, so coming the other way, they knowingly would locate within 1,500 feet.
and they can do that.
Right.
So if somebody had a piece of vacant property and they decided at some point they wanted to have it rezoned residential or whatever, they could do that, just knowing that they would be within that,
Within that zone.
right? It wouldn't change the boundaries, and it wouldn't restrict their use of that property.
But on the other side, if that grower or dispensary or cultivator ever closed, and there was another one proposed to be open as a new special use, it would further tighten up where they could do that. They might not be able to open a second one there.
Right.
Any other questions from the commission?
More questions, but I'm interested in what the public has to say
Yeah,
too,
it's
so.
fine.
Do you have
I'm
the sign-in
definitely here.
sheet?
No, yeah, you can bring it over, please.
This is kind of like if this was your homework, you'd just put it aside for another time. You say, "I don't want to do this."
Yeah, right. Read it the night before the public hearing.
Okay, we're going to open up the public hearing portion of the meeting now, and I'll go by order of people who have signed in. So first on the agenda here is Susan George.
I think we should take it 3 times after this and talk about it.
Hello, everybody. I'm Susan George. I live at 269 Larsdaughter Lane, Geneva. And I have some thoughts I want to share. They'll be brief. Why do we live in Geneva? Why do we pay these high taxes? It's because we love our kids, and we want them to have great schools. And if our kids are already grown, we want our homes to be marketable to families with children. We want our kids to grow up and be great human beings. We want to confidently pass on to them the leadership of our country. But can we do this and set the example we are contemplating at this meeting? The decision to make easy and convenient the purchase of marijuana. Marijuana is a Schedule I drug, and it is illegal under federal law. Are we going to set the example of defying and disobeying federal law as a community and expect our kids to honor us and honor the law? How bad is marijuana? It is very bad. And it is very bad for the developing brain. The human brain is undergoing maturing and development until the age of 25, according to the University of Rochester Medical Center's Health Encyclopedia. Increasing availability and giving marijuana the appearance of legality is sending the wrong message to our young people. It is sending them the message that marijuana is healthy, safe, and socially acceptable. What message do we want to send to our kids? Make it a strong message that marijuana is not going to help them and that you and we do not condone it. Do not retail it, do not infuse it, and do not package it in our city of Geneva. So the secretary is where? We were supposed to leave some,
You can leave it with me.
okay, I'll have to get it.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. Next person on the list is Victor Porncasio. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce it.
Yeah, I told my name down there because I haven't had anything, but you have my testimony in your papers.
Oh, okay. Do you don't care to give testimony? Okay. John Stevenson.
Ladies and gentlemen of the commission, I appreciate the opportunity. Fellow Geneva residents, I appreciate the opportunity to take a little bit of your time this evening. My name is John Stevenson. I live on 521 Forest View Drive, just south of the train station, not too far from the Fabian Villa. A quick background, real quick, show of hands, has anyone here lived in a community or in a state that has had a substantial amount of time, i.e. we'll call Colorado or Washington, since the inception of legal medical and recreational marijuana?
Our son lives in Colorado.
Outstanding. Oh,
Your buddy?
you're lucky because you're my outstanding. All right.
Neighbor.
Oh, my neighbor. All right. Outstanding. Well, you're in luck tonight because I moved back to Geneva. A quick background on myself. I grew up in Geneva, moved here in 1982. My father was transferred to work here. So I grew up in Geneva, 82 to 92, graduated from Geneva High School. I have a good working knowledge of the culture of Geneva because it really hasn't changed that much, which is one of the beauties of it. I went on, 24 years in the military, retired in 2016, traveled all over the country, lived all over the country, traveled all over the world as well. And what better place and opportunity to move back to? I chose Geneva. And where did I move from? Colorado Springs. 2 years ago, we moved back here, my family, my wife, my two daughters, currently 12 and 11 years old. And we moved back to Geneva, and what do we get? And you could ask every one of our friends who we've made as we've been here, or people I've known and acquaintance, they all say, well, you went the wrong way. Why did you leave Colorado? And I understand that when I left Geneva, I wanted to leave Geneva, go places, but I came back here, and I'll tell you what, my wife and I, with a smile on our face, we say, I understand what you're saying, but we couldn't have left fast enough. I moved back to Geneva from Colorado. I lived in Colorado Springs from 2008 till 2016. I saw the entire spectrum and how it morphed from medical marijuana into recreational, and how the dispensaries they were big, and they ultimately consolidated. Where they are now, not the best places in town. And so I'm going to try to keep my discussion with you academic in nature, and I'm going to try to keep it tied to the 9 standards so you have the ability, this is what, sort of the metrics that you're given, along with specifically to dispensaries. I can't speak to the manufacturing infusing areas or the cultivation centers, but I'll talk about dispensaries because I have a lot of experience. And what I did was I grabbed a letter. I couldn't pass up this letter from Zanti Blue. He lives in Colorado Springs. And when I read this letter, I'm thinking, I have so many of the same experiences as Zanti. Now, I'm not going to go through the entire letter because I want to try and keep this brief and stick to the 9 standards of which this commission is required to think. But I'm going to start real quick here. I've lived in Colorado Springs since 1981. Saying pot has had no negative effects on what was a clean, friendly, and far less dangerous place is just plain BS. Clean, friendly, less dangerous, it's obviously his idea, and we're talking the cultural changes, and it's going to happen. Anyway, let me start off by explaining that I'm not one of these richy people who likes to go buy their high-end pot and go home to their social bubble. I work for a living. I'm also a night person, up all night doing errands, and I actually talk to the street people.
Can you slow down just a little bit?
Oh, sorry. All right. And I actually talk to the street people and those who have come here for the pot. So I'm not just making this up. This is what I have seen. This is what I have heard from the people who have moved here for the pot, and what I've seen my beautiful town turn into. It's Colorado Springs, Manitou Springs, which is a suburb on the southwest side. Only one of about maybe 15 is actually one of our homeless. The rest are pot tourists. I had the exact same experiences. My wife and I had the exact same experiences. My folks moved here this summer from Colorado Springs, where they lived for 19 years. And they will tell you the exact same thing, which leads us to zoning issues. A standard parking lot for a dispensary, wow. I think you should go to Colorado Springs, go down to Manitou Springs or Platte Avenue. They're not the best parts of town. You'll be safe during the day there. But go and observe a dispensary for 4 hours and look at the amount of transient traffic. And oh, by the way, these aren't going to be people getting off the train in Geneva. Oh, I think I'll walk by and get a marijuana joint on my way home. Nope. These are going to be people who, from all over the place. And they're going to be people who may not fit the cultural identity of Geneva. It may, I'm going to leave it at that. But a standing parking lot, the traffic is one of your metrics. Good luck with that. And also the traffic accidents will increase. I've seen it with my own eyes. Zanti has seen it. Everyone, ask any police officer in Colorado, they're going to tell you the same thing. Look at the national metrics. Every state that has legalized recreational marijuana has seen an increase of 5%. Okay, 5% increase. Well, that's not that much, unless it's your son or daughter. Oh. Maybe it is. I don't know, something to think about. But the traffic will increase, and that's an issue. You can hop online, and if you look up articles, traffic and medical marijuana, or traffic and marijuana dispensaries, look for yourself. Check it out tonight. Read some articles. You'll see. So I'm going to skip this next paragraph. He's just basically angry about what has happened. But the next paragraph from Zanti, the truth is, we had all the dregs from all the other states rush here thinking it was free-for-all smoke fest. They brought our homeless population to such a high number that we've had to make several new laws to keep them from flipping signs begging for money at every, and I mean every street corner. That's a fact. It's out of control. Build new homeless shelters and deal with fun new issues like human waste and our once clean streams running through town. I'm a pilot for American Airlines. I actually just got back from a layover in Seattle last night, where on my way to dinner, walking 4 blocks, going through a couple clouds of marijuana. I just don't like it. And, you know, I understand it's coming to the state. I get it. I understand there can be some money made. I get it. There are a lot of people, a huge percentage of people here in Geneva, I guarantee, are going to be put off by this. Use that in your consideration when you're thinking about some of these 9 standards. The next thing, and then he talks about, obviously, the human waste thing. I had a layover in Denver a couple weeks ago. 16th Street Mall was an awesome place. We used to go there with our family all the time. My wife, about 4 years ago, I was gone on a trip through the military, and she said, I can't take the daughters down to 16th Street anymore. It's changed. It's disgusting. I stepped over something on 16th Street Mall. There's closed storefronts. We can't let this happen to 3rd Street, State Street, anywhere in Geneva. Please, this is going to, it's not good. Let me continue. I apologize for taking too much time here, but I'll try to be as concise as possible. It's brought a higher level of criminal to our town that our people and police force were totally unprepared for. Get ready for that. All I hear about are cars getting stolen, people getting pickpocketed professionally. Some of this. We had some of this before, that is understood, but I'm talking the criminal level was ratcheted up at least 5 levels. That's a fact. You'll see that. I guess the question will be, maybe for the alderman or something, when we're talking about zoning, is which neighborhood it's going to be near a neighborhood, and I guess the question is, which neighborhood are we going to ruin? It's fine, but we got to pick which one, and someone's going to have to raise their hand and say, oh, okay, let's ruin my district. Just be ready for it. So if we choose to put one of these somewhere, we'll be careful about that. Let's see. He talks about the money, and I'm not going to get into that. That's not this commission's purview, I would say. Increased job prices, negative aspects. I'm sure I've left a lot of negative aspects of pot out in my rant, but I think you get the gist. Let's see. I'm all for personal freedom. That is hugely important to me, as proven by my dreadlocks and my tattoos and my nonconformist attitude about everything. But when your freedom infringes on my life, I got a problem with it, and that's what has happened here. People don't wave at each other anymore. People used to stop for pedestrians, and now it's like a game of Frogger. Everybody is mean and miserable, and it wasn't like that before the damn pot became legal. I pardon that language. So to everyone that's like, pot is great, it hasn't affected our town badly at all, blah, 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 I really don't know what your problem is. Maybe they need to walk a mile in some other shoes or something. I don't know, but they don't know what they're talking about. Talking about Frogger, the traffic, get ready. The mean attitude. Geneva has always been cool. We got to keep it that way. From a zoning perspective, just remember, the proposed building or use will not adversely affect or change the character of the area in which it's located. I see it with my first eyes. I've seen it from 2008 to 2016 in Colorado Springs. I see it when I go on layovers to Seattle, San Francisco, Portland, Colorado Springs, Denver. It's coming. I get it. Don't make it easy in Geneva. Please don't. And then last thing really quick would be specifics based on some of the comments, some of the slides I saw. But okay, center of town. We're going to put one of these in the center of town. If we do, let me know. I'll be the first one. I'm going to grab a lawn chair, and a bag of popcorn and sit down and watch the absolute implosion. It is going to be pure comedy to see all the people come rushing in. Between 4 o'clock and 6 o'clock in the afternoon, Monday through Friday. Whoa, that's going to be incredible. Let's see, liquor stores. Okay, well, it's another retail store like a liquor store. Not necessarily true, because you have to remember, liquor stores are everywhere. You can buy beer or wine in a gas station everywhere, to include every neighboring town. So you have a consumer diffusion, if you will. It's entropy throughout the entire state. If we're only going to have a few towns that have legal marijuana, and some of our neighbors, West Chicago said no, Batavia, St. Charles said yes, but if we're only going to have a few of these dispensaries, you can't just go down to Burger Local and grab a beer, or you can't just go to Safeway and grab a beer or a bottle of wine. You got a couple places, and if there's 2 in Geneva or 1 in Geneva, well, hello, everyone around us. They're coming through. Traffic, you bet. Coming in down there, the one that's down by my house, down there by the Campana building, that intersection, Fabian and 31, is a high-risk intersection right now. Tack on a dispensary, that traffic, toast. All those big, nice open areas out east of town. Well, how many people in Geneva? Stand over on the corner, go stand by the Gen Ho on the east side from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock, Monday through Friday afternoon. Look at the cars. They're stacked up all the way out to Couts Road or beyond. Put that in there, put a dispensary in there in one of those areas out in the far east side of town. Oh, I'd love to watch that. Again, I'll grab a lawn chair and a bag of popcorn and watch the traffic just completely bottleneck and watch the anger start to hit Geneva. I don't know. Things to think about. Let's see, talked about that. That's it. All I'm saying is I've seen this progression with my own eyes. So happy to move back to Geneva. Chose Geneva specifically. Left Colorado happily. I really don't want to see it change. Remember, keep these 9 standards. These 9 standards are difficult. They're difficult to follow. And I'm always around. I'd love to. I can hold any sidebar conversations. The other issues, I'll be speaking at every meeting that I can possibly attend, given my schedule, because I have a lot more information of things that I would consider detrimental. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Next is Mary Lou O'Halloran, I believe it is.
Mary Lou O'Halloran, 1919 Heather Road, Geneva. Excuse me. You're the gentleman right here. What is your name?
John Stevenson.
And Suzanne? Okay. They kind of capped what I was going to say, and I wasn't going to say it because we were told that tonight is not that. But since they did talk about it, I won't go on and on. I hope you received the packet that John and I gave each one of you, which goes into everything thoroughly researched. Okay, it isn't hearsay. The second thing is, if any of you want a copy of this book, Tell Your Children the Truth About Marijuana, Mental Illness, and Violence by Alex Berenson. My husband and Educating Voices had this gentleman. He's an investigative reporter for the New York Times, and his wife is a psychiatrist and works...
Ma'am, excuse me, it's...
Okay, anyway, it goes into everything that these two people just spoke about. And and I think, is it John? John spoke. I thought what John said was fantastic. I would table this whole thing to all of you, do your homework, and you thoroughly research. You're the planners of our community. There are a couple of us in the audience who've done this work in Geneva with Chick Williams, who's deceased now, and his wife, Linda, who are our prevention intervention specialists hired by the city of Geneva, hired by our schools. We all have done this work. We have done this work on this issue and every other issue. And I would encourage you, for 25 years, and Julie Pouilly is here from the Geneva Coalition of Youth. This is nothing new, but to do what you're about to do, and that's your job, the planning, I get it, the zoning, But I would ask you to table this till you have thoroughly researched what you're planning out for our city, because it is totally against the character and values of our city. I was the first chair of the strategic plan, worked with the entire community in the beginning, and the strategic plan mission isn't that much different. The mission of our character and our integrity and our authenticity and staying true to ourselves. So I would encourage you as city planners, zoning specialists, etc., all this stuff, to study the issue thoroughly before you offer your suggestions. And I know that's not you opting out, but I would encourage you to do that because I think it'll be very important to this discussion, whether we opt out or not. Thank you.
Thank you. John O'Halloran. John?
Good evening. I'm John O'Halloran at 1919 Heather Road in Geneva. Been living here over 40 years, so we had our history with it. I gave you the packet. I know it wasn't something to be, I did not know when I gave it to you what your parameters were. I was told that we were going to have a hearing on the marijuana issue and dispensing at this hearing. I didn't understand why, because I agreed, well, you put the cart before the horse here. And so I didn't understand why we were going through this. I kind of disagree with what was said about why you have to go through this right now. I think the Plan Commission, you could decide to opt out. You can make the recommendation that Geneva opt out of all of these considerations. And it's not going to be a problem for you. I think you have that option, and I think you should do that. One of the things is that I have an updated list that I could find of local governments which have opted out or approved dispensaries. If you want a copy, got a copy, I can give them to you.
Thank you, sir.
It's as current as, oh, I'm sorry, I apologize.
You want to leave those guys out? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
That's the best that I could come up with currently. Of course, added on, as one gentleman said, the West Chicago has opted out. Kane County has opted out. DuPage County has opted out. So, but anyway, that's an option. Whether this is the proper forum for the Plan Commission to do it, that was a good question. It looks like as you go through some of the material I'll give you, some cities or municipalities did give it to the Plan Commission, and sometimes the Plan Commission decided to opt out. A lot of the municipalities, the city council or village board made that decision to opt out or not to opt out first. So, anyway, my suggestion is that you should just opt out. Just make that recommendation, makes it easy. You can all go home, go to bed and enjoy a beer tonight. So. And I'm going to give you, this is from the Illinois Municipal League. They gave a model ordinance for the cities to use if you're going to opt out. And I can give you a copy. And what this does, you talk about defining what you can or can't do. This has all the definitions of the that David was talking about regarding what the permissive uses are or not are. But it has all the definitions in there. So I disagree that if you don't have the definitions, that the marijuana can be sold in any retail district. I don't think that's correct. If you have the opt-out ordinance that the Illinois Municipal League has presented, you would have, it would be very specific to cover that. So I'm going to give you a copy of those also.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
This is on the website too. This is one of those examples.
So, it's very clear, as I understand, is that your decision tonight, your mandate from the city was not to decide whether you're going to opt out or not, and that's my understanding. And so, obviously, that's not going to be a decision to make, but I think you can make it if you so wanted to. So we're talking about medical dispensaries primarily, marijuana dispensaries, not medical, marijuana dispensaries primarily, because the other ones, the cultivation centers, I think we kind of agree, probably is not something that's going to be viable or available in the city of Geneva. Craft growers, as you have defined it, is that what is craft? Probably would, because craft growers are not cultivating. They just take the product and then they somehow package it or process it for sale. So that's a different type of a setup. You're not growing it. The concern I had with cultivation, which I don't think we're going to have here, is that no one's talking about the environmental impact and any kind of an environmental impact study that cultivation center or cultivation facilities would have. And there are. My package included information on that. But since it's not going to be an issue, it's fine. But if you are going to address it, if it's something that you're going to consider, then I think you should also include an environmental impact study or consideration for a cultivation center wherever it would be placed. A craft grower, I don't know what's involved as far as craft growing or processing or infusing. If that has any kind of environmental impact. You're dealing with a drug here, cannabis, and you may have a horrendous smell, and I don't know what kind of chemicals would be put into the environment, but that's a concern that I think should be addressed. I don't think you have the information to address it here, but I think it's a legitimate concern. We had a problem with Burgess Norton. I remember in the last few years, they had a horrible smell. We couldn't figure out where it was coming from. And so I don't know if a cultivation center would have the same issue or problem. We just don't know that. So I think that should be a concern, and that should be something that should be looked at and taken into consideration. So dispensaries. As far as the model, what's being recommended here, a few issues. Do we know what a dispensary looks like? What I did is I went online and I took some photographs of dispensaries from Colorado, Washington, Oregon, and California. Obviously, there's some which are horrific looking, others which may be more presentable, and I'm sure they can be presentable, but if we've never seen them, how do you address what you should require them to look like, or what uses they have, or how they should be functioning? So I'm going to give you just a few.
Did we look into where they're allowed in Colorado? They've done their zoning?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
So, as we start out, as you go through your ordinance or what's being suggested here, a couple of things you have to take into consideration. Medical dispensaries today are a cash business. They cannot use a credit card. So they are a cash business, and they have an illegal drug, which Illinois says is now legal, but it's still an illegal drug. The concern I have, if you have a dispensary, that's a target. That's a target for all kinds of things, you know, for people trying to steal things or whatever you want to do. And you talk about surveillance, but I don't know what kind of security measures are in place or should be in place, but I think security issues should be addressed. We should hear from the police department. What are their expectations? What are their recommendations? So I think that's a real concern because of the product being there and the money the cash they're going to have. Number two, as far as how the dispensaries, if you so choose to go that route, they should also be limited, and I think, in how they are presented. Do we want to have display windows? Do you want to have people being able to look inside a dispensary to see all the displays that they have for the different product they have, the candy, the edibles, all the other stuff? Or do we want to have that blacked out? Do we want to make sure that it's not visible from the outside? I think that's a reasonable, and it should be a concern for us if we're looking at having dispensaries. As far as where they're located, they should not be on 3rd Street or State Street at all, at least in downtown area. I don't know how you can, I mean, Geneva is, you know, I have a son who lives in Munster, Indiana. His Park District is busing people to come to Geneva, 3rd Street. There's an outing. And that's not, you know, that's typical of many other communities. They come to Geneva and 3rd Street and State Street because they want to go there and shop and feel comfortable with it. You put a pot shop or a marijuana shop, a dispensary in there, I think it's going to deflate their whole experience. I think it's going to be a turnoff, and I think you're probably going to lose a lot of business from that. So I don't think it should be anywhere there. Also do not think it should be anywhere where there's foot traffic with kids. I don't care if it's on, you know, Randall Road or anywhere else. If you have kids who are walking around the shopping centers, different areas, we should not have a dispensary there. Again, as our people before me were talking about, you know, we're trying to keep an environment safe for these kids. And you have to give a message to the kids that we do not agree with marijuana for you. It's bad for you. And if you start having dispensaries there where they can walk by and look at it, of course they're going to be curious. And of course they're going to look around and they're going to be thinking, they're going to just be thinking about it. I think it should be eliminated from anywhere where you're going to have foot traffic with kids. I don't know where that is, but I think you have to look at the map and figure that out. Okay. Hours. The proposed, as you go through the thing here, they talked about having hours 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. I don't understand that. Why would you even suggest that? I don't know what other business would have those unless you're, you know, a 7-Eleven. We have to have reasonable hours if you're going to have it. And it should not be 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. And that's something I think it should be discussed and addressed. 150 feet, 150 feet is nothing. I mean, I just don't see how that's reasonable as a setback or a set-off for these different uses, the dispensaries from churches, residential or daycare. I think I think Deerfield put a restriction of 1,000 feet from schools and 500 feet from parks. This ordinance here that is being suggested here does not refer to parks. Now, I don't know if any parks fall within that area that you're talking about, but I think parks should be considered also. So you should look at that as far as a restriction on where they should be in their parks. And if we increase the footage on that, and it eliminates great many areas, well, that's Geneva. So be it. You know, that's okay. I have no problem with that. Signage, and I think there's signage restrictions and ordinances that come into play, and I think it probably have to be approved if there was a special use or something. I think signage would have to be addressed. Is that correct? Yeah. Yeah. So okay, but anyway, I didn't know what kind of signage would be allowed, but obviously you don't want to have signs which are going to be inviting to our youth to come in and you know, to try or look at their product. You know, the edibles are a real problem. The edibles are going to be an issue we're all going to face, no matter if we have dispensaries here or not. Every one of us is going to be faced with a problem with the edibles, with our children, our grandchildren, or other people that we know, because they are so unpredictable. They are so high in their THC. They're made with almost with a wax or a 99% THC. So it's a real high THC content, and you can't control how it's, because it takes a couple hours, they say, for it to start taking effect. The problem is that some people don't feel the effect right away, like you get from smoked marijuana, and they keep taking more and more because they say it's not working. Well, then it leads to real serious issues and problems. That's been documented, and that was in my packet. So edibles is a problem that we have. And how that's being displayed or marketed, I think, is something, I don't know if you can restrict that in your considerations, but obviously there's got to be some consideration or some addressing the issue of marketing and of these different products. Okay. You do say that a facility must have working video surveillance, but I think we have to. I think you have to be a little more specific if you're going to address that, because you have to have exterior and interior surveillance. I think you got to have both, for a lot of reasons. For in case anything criminal activity comes on place or there's other things going on, you have to have both. And it should be required that the records of that surveillance be kept for either indefinitely or kept for a certain amount of time in case it ever had to refer to in the future if there's any action or activity that requires it. There's no consideration here talking about employees of these dispensaries or these other units, what their age limits are. Obviously, if you can't purchase it at age 21, I would assume then you don't want to have an employee that's under 21. So, but that's not even addressed anywhere. And I think that's something that should be addressed also as part of a restriction or an ordinance. I think you got the gist of what I had to say. I thank you for listening, but I tried to address some of the specifics. But I still think you can, if you so choose, you could take it, throw it back to the city and say, hey, listen, we recommend that we opt out. And you'll see, as I say, the model ordinance that you have there, that gives you what that would look like, and would save you all kinds of issues and problems. Thank you very much. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next person, I think, is Christine Kiefer.
Christine Kiefer, 210 South Bennett Street, Geneva. Most of my comments I will save for the upcoming city council meetings, but I do want to address you for one brief minute because I am a downtown property owner. My building is half a block from these quarters. I was also a downtown business for 13 years, and I don't understand why you would be hamstringing the downtown businesses that are struggling so much to remain open by opening the floodgates to this kind of thing. I find it hard to believe that we're even talking about it in this town. Thank you.
Thank you. John Keith.
You're talking dispensary again.
Good evening. My name's John Kiefer, Dr. John Kiefer. I practiced medicine for 40 years in this town. I practice cardiology, so I find there's a lot of people I don't know, but in the practice of cardiology, maybe I took care of some of your parents or grandparents. There was always people older than me who were maybe not with us so much. But anyway, I'd like to say a few things about the issue. First of all, I think I should like to clarify that since 2014 in Illinois, we've had a compassionate use program for marijuana. It's called the Medical Cannabis Patient Program, and there's about 100 diseases that a patient can have. And they can see a doctor and get certified to get marijuana, even though the treatment's really, the evidence-based treatment for many of these conditions, there's not a lot of good scientific evidence. But anyway, there's about 100 things you can say are bothering you, and you can find a doctor that would certify that you should have marijuana. And then there's about 100 dispensaries in the state. Mr. DeGroot said there's 75 right around here. I know there's one in St. Charles, North Aurora, et cetera. So, and some people would say, well, I'm a veteran and I came back with, PTSD or something. Well, no doctor is going to say, no, you can't have marijuana, even though there's not good evidence for it. So, but it's available, I guess. It's available, in the area for people that would want to have it through this compassionate use program. So what we'll have January 1st is recreational use. Now, if somebody wanted me to prescribe marijuana and they weren't in this compassionate use program, I can't do it. It's a Schedule I drug. It's the same as cocaine or heroin. Even though I have a DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency license, I can't write a prescription for drugs that are Schedule I, and marijuana is one of them. So that's kind of a big conflict, I guess, between federal law and now our new state law. My colleague, Dr. Rodney Nelson, kind of points out that he thought those conflicts were settled at Appomattox in 1865 between General Grant and General Lee. But we might be, revisiting that at some point. But anyway, in terms of the zoning, there is some danger to the compound, the marijuana. Some of the experience from Colorado that John Stevenson was a friend of my son. But glad to see you back, John. I haven't seen you in 20 years. That since marijuana was legalized there, there's been a 200 to 700-fold, like 200 to 700% increase in motor vehicle accidents. Traffic fatalities have doubled, and we don't have any tests for impairment. Like if a policeman, woman pulls somebody over and wants to say if they're impaired from marijuana, they can't do a test. There's a blood test, but if you stick somebody with a needle without their permission, that's like an assault. So you can't do a blood test unless they give you permission. And then the drug can persist in the urine for 3-4 weeks after use. So there's no good way to regulate it in terms of traffic. 70% of marijuana users in Colorado say that they will drive after using it, and 40% of marijuana users say they'll drive while using it. And I have a son that lives out there, and I've seen it with my own eyes. Somebody, driving on the expressway 45 miles an hour, having a good time, laughing and smiling.
Sir, that's policy that you're talking about now. Do you have something with land use or zoning conditions?
Well, I think the traffic, the people that, we're trying to make Geneva a pedestrian-friendly place, somewhere we can walk. I mean, we are having, traffic fatalities here. And I think if we, make marijuana more available here, we're going to have more traffic deaths. Also, there's a cost. I think in Colorado, for every dollar that the state gets in revenue, they have to spend $4.50 in costs. The costs are primarily medical care, but also law enforcement and loss of productivity. So if we, make the marijuana more available here, we'll have to absorb more costs instead of benefiting. And the biggest cost is on the young, because it has some negative effects on the people's brain that are still developing. I know we do have medical zoning in Geneva, and I don't know if it seems to me that when the law takes effect in Illinois about having medical dispensaries for marijuana, they want it to initially be in the dispensaries that are already available, and then maybe after 6 months they'll say that other stores can come to being. But I wonder if we wouldn't use some of the medical zoning that we already have if we want to bring marijuana into Geneva, and maybe if the council votes to have recreational zoning, just add that on to where the medical zoning is. And then lastly, I think I'd like you to think of the costs of bringing it to the town, both in traffic accidents, making Geneva livable, and also, the costs on the young who are going to bear that cost from a lot of medical conditions more than anybody else. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think it's Judy Poultry. Might not have gotten the last name correct.
Hello, Julie Pouilly.
Okay.
Pouilly, like the wine. Anyway,
Your address?
1635 Kime Circle. I've been a resident of Geneva since 2008, and I'm the president of the Geneva Coalition for Youth. And I just have to say it's ironic when I haven't been in this building in a while, and I walked up the stairs, and the number of candlelight vigils that we've held out there during Red Ribbon Week with Mayor Byrne, and the number of times I've been in here with children that signed the declaration of Red Ribbon Week, supporting, the anti-drug campaign. And here I stand today. I just find it completely ironic. But anyway, it's a good process, and I'm glad we're going through it and having the discussion. I won't go into, I clearly am an opt-out person, but I do just have a couple of questions. John already addressed the employees. Do they have to be 21 or older? I'm also curious, the people that go in the store, do they have to be 21 or older? I don't know. They do? Yeah, okay. Okay. I didn't see that. So, and the other thing I wanted to comment on is, I'm the person on our street that organizes the block party. I'm the person that we have new neighbors come in, and I'm the one that has the coffee. And I hear all the time, we'll always say, you know, where did you come from? Why did you choose Geneva? And it seems to me, so many of the people have said, you know, we were between Geneva and Naperville, but we chose Geneva because it's, you know, it's Mayberry, right? You know, that's what everyone says. And I wonder, I read just recently online that Naperville opted out. So I wonder if those people will come to our community anymore if we do have the dispensaries here. So I just wanted to make that point. I appreciate the work you're doing, and I look forward to taking it to the next step and talking to the city council about, you know, what we're all our experiences and our background and what we can offer to the decision-making process. So thank you.
Thank you. Final one on the list is Brett Porter.
Brett Border, 623 North Street, Geneva. I'll be very brief because I didn't really prepare anything for this, but I'm also behind everybody here as far as the opt-out, I think, is the only way. I know we're here as a zoning discussion, so I think if we can't make the strong foot forward to opt-out as I believe we should. I've been a resident for over 15 years. Married my wife here, raising 3 children here. It's just kind of going against everything that I believe our community is. And if we can't take the strong stance opt-out, and this is a zoning commission here, I think then you could take the back door and make the zoning impossible to have it anywhere here. I feel strongly this has no place in the community. And that's, I mean, something that an American and a family man, I just don't understand how this even came to where it is today. But thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. All right, so that's everyone on the list. Does anyone else wish to speak on this matter? It's not on the list. Appreciate it. Thank you for the offer. I got a lot of reading materials, believe me, on this issue. It took me a while to read it. Please come forward. Please come forward.
This has nothing to do with the politics of what we're talking about today, but District 304 has a forum that they're holding next Thursday night at 7 o'clock at the high school, and it's called Legalized Marijuana, What Now? Vaping, something, and something else. I can't remember the last 2 things, but I've heard that the speaker is excellent. It would be another opportunity, you know, to hear from someone who's, I think he's, I can't remember his name, but I think he works out at Rosecrans maybe. But I think it will be an interesting forum, and I've talked to all our coalition members and have asked them to attend because regardless of whether we opt in or opt out, there are dispensaries in local communities, and we must educate our families and our community members on what this means. Because I think for, you know, it's like vaping. You know, if you read the statistics, the number of kids that never smoked before, but then they thought vaping was safe. You know, the perceived risk when it's legal is, I think for the young kids, it really has an effect. So anyway, I just think it's going to be a great forum, and I've heard it's a great speaker, so everyone is welcome. But you have to respond. I think you have to register in advance. Anyway.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak?
Should we close the public hearing? Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Call roll.
Bates?
Yes.
Evans?
Aye.
Kasserag?
Aye.
Mead?
Aye.
Rittenhouse?
Aye.
Slivka?
Aye.
Stocking?
Aye.
wanted it before the end of the meeting.
Thank you. That's right. We just need it.
Mr. Chairman, I suggest that we take this up in the order that Brad suggested. Perhaps talk about the three different major types of businesses.
That's perfectly fine.
I agree.
I think, yeah, systematically trying to work through it. I'm good with that. Hearing no objection.
I'd like to take 1 minute while the public's still here, though, and comment on some of the things they said, if I can. You know, what Mr. DeGroot said, you know, that this is just another product, and it's legal, and people are able, maybe it is, but it's not legal federally yet. And there are a lot of states, as this other gentleman pointed out, that are not doing this. So we are going to have people crossing state lines, crossing city lines, crossing whatever, whether it adds, you know, whatever problems, it's going to create some sort of problems. You know, I think we are putting the cart before the horse. I'm not clear on why why we're doing this. I think the city council should have taken a stand and said we do or we don't, and then we figure out where they go. If they, you know, and the problem here is that these people, this is a public hearing, but their hands are tied. They're only supposed to talk about zoning. Well, you know, if we approve this, what we're doing is rubber stamping and green lighting this for the city council. It's for the, and then they say, well, zoning on planning already approved it, so we're good to go. It just, you know, pushes it one step further down the road for them. I think that they should have made this decision. I don't think we should be doing this. And I think that we could opt out. You know, and what's the big deal? Why don't we take the stand that Naperville or Batavia or whoever did? You know, let's give it a year. Maybe in a year they'll have a way to test people when they're driving. Maybe in a year we'll see what some of these other communities to do. You know, we're going to gain 1 year of revenue off of 2 dispensaries or 3 or whatever we approve. You know, I don't understand why we're at the place we're at right now. That's what I have to say.
I'd like to add to Terry's. I just wrote down some comments, and forgive me, just bear with me a second, but just 4 things. What's the upside of all this for our community? I really don't know. I don't think 3% means a lot to Geneva in terms of the revenue, so if it was money, I would, you know, that's one thing. I don't think it is. Number 2, what's the rush? To Terry's point, this is going to be law on January 1st, and are we opening Pandora's box to pigeonholing ourselves into a future of, you know, well, yeah, we zone this, we zone that, and then people come in and do what they want. So why rush it? If this is successful, I guarantee it'll be there a year from now, 2 years from now for us to discuss. Number 3, my biggest concern is how is this going to be regulated by the state of Illinois? That's a huge concern of mine. I think everybody has, you know, well thought this out in terms of bringing it to Illinois, but like with, you know, a lot of things that go on in our state, I'm concerned about the regulation aspect. And to my point earlier, I really think the city council should have just made a statement of, hey, this is what, you know, we're going to do. We can spend the next 2-3 hours here rezoning everything, and in 2 or 3 weeks, the city council will say, we're out. So, thank you.
So to address one of your points, John, so David, what happens if we don't do anything on the zoning side of things in the ordinance come January 1?
Well, I think we need to define the terms.
Yeah, we have to do that.
Minimally.
It's just a retail use.
That way, if they're not listed in a zoning district, they're defined, and we know that they're not permitted because they're not listed. So I think minimally that if the commission wants to opt out, that should be the recommendation for the text amendments moving forward. Does that answer the question?
I guess so. That's like the minimum
Okay.
amount of, and then everything else would be something the commission would want to do through findings.
We're
Right.
in trouble hearing you.
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. Sometimes I don't talk loud. We're just discussing what the issue is on. So Yeah, if we don't, if we don't make that motion and just say that we're gonna define the list and basically not grant.
Right, the recommendation would be to define the terms and then not to list them in any of the zoning districts.
And then there'd be any other variants that we would want for like additional changes to take in other zones and, make actual decisions on locations. Would be the other part of it. That'd be the second part.
What? I guess I'm not understanding the question.
Well,
I think you guys have to talk into your mics.
Yeah, they don't.
You have to talk into your
I
mic.
can't,
a
I
little
can't
bit.
even hear you, Scott.
In terms of, okay, well, basically we have two basic choices. We can just list them out and say they're not permitted in any district. And then the second one would be a variation of that. So like we would say, we would actually list in like we think it belongs in an I-2 district, or it should be a special permit or whatever. So sort of, we have to kind of broach that first part.
So if we did that now, we just put in the definitions, but we did not allow them in any district, and then it goes to council, and council decides to opt in, then would it come back to us?
This again.
And we do this again as to
Well-
where they would be located?
The Planning and Zoning Commissions are a recommending body, so your recommendation to the council, if all you're looking to do is define the terms and not list them, would be basically to opt out.
Right.
That would be the recommendation that's advanced. If the council doesn't accept that recommendation, then they would be looking at these same maps and issues and say, well, if we're going to allow them, in what zones do we feel they're appropriate? I mean, they would be considering this entire public hearing and deliberation by the commission and making their decision.
So there's no way that we can, we have to make a recommendation one way or the other. I don't like the idea that we're kind of de facto saying opt out, but at the same time, I agree that it makes more sense for the council to act before we do. There's no way for us to just say we are not making a recommendation on this issue until after the council decides whether to opt in or opt out.
I do see that in the information he gave us, in Oak Park, the Plan Commission unanimously rejected a recommendation from the village staff to make dispensaries a permitted use. And then the trustees voted to make the business type a permitted use. So, I mean, they can do that, and I don't
Feel
know
like-
why it couldn't get kicked back to us then.
I just don't know that I want to take a stand that I am saying we should opt out as a community, because I haven't really made up my mind on that issue. That isn't what I was prepared to do tonight, because I didn't think that was our responsibility to decide policy-wise whether to opt in or opt out.
John or Michael wants to say something.
So I think, as I see it, this is a what if. If the council should want to decide to move forward this, what does the Planning and Zoning Commission recommend? What locations, should we consider as part of our decision-making process? Obviously, they don't have to go forward with any of it.
Yeah, I don't think there's much wrong, from my point of view, with them saying, well, what would it look like? Tell us, give us some feedback from the commission, tell us what it would look like, and then maybe they could make a more informed decision. Personally, I don't have a problem with that.
That's not the way I'm reading this, though, on what we got from the city here. It says, the proposal as described in the following sections is to allow each of the cannabis uses defined as a special use in the city of Geneva. That's the proposal, and that's what we'd be voting on.
But
So essentially, we are saying, yeah, go for it.
Well, but that doesn't give any, it's not a by right then, correct? So we're not saying that anybody then can, if this
special
is
use.
approved, can
Everything's special
operate
use.
that business. It still has to go through another process.
And the report that was given were draft amendments for your consideration. There could be variations of that based on the commission's discussion this evening.
Could reject most of it and do a very small portion. Did you want to say something?
Couple things. The council's decision to ultimately opt opt-out. And everyone should know, it is an opt-out statute. The law in the state of Illinois, and effective January 1, 2020, is it's permitted unless a village or city opts out. So, and there's a hard deadline on that. To Brad's point, council twice wanted to get the input of this tribunal with respect to what would it look like if it were permitted in Geneva? What areas in town, particularly industrial areas, would it make sense, if at all? Ultimately, it is a policy decision the elected officials have the responsibility to undertake. So a de facto decision by this group, certainly you can do whatever you want. Ultimately, you're a recommending body in this regard. Ultimately, council would have to permit by way of determining they wanted to stay in, and then adopting land use that was appropriate. Obviously, it would then come back to you if you decide you don't want to do anything now. Because, again, they're the policymakers, they're the elected officials. I certainly understand why some think maybe the cart is before the horse. I think that's not an unreasonable perspective, nor is trying to get purview of this specialty group that has unique land use and zoning perspectives, guidelines, and thoughts if they decide to stay in. That doesn't probably help you with your decision, only to the effect you should know what you decide won't be binding, but rather recommending.
Oh, yeah, it's always the case. That's always the case. We're always clear on that.
I mean, I think, for example, maybe, I have no idea. I did watch some of the city council meeting about it, but not all of it. Would we recommend it be on 3rd Street or not? Or State Street? I'm not saying yes or no right now. I'm just saying they might be interested to know when they vote, how are we going to propose the zoning to be? And I think that's reasonable to have an idea as they look at their policy decision to know how we're going to recommend it be zoned. Sort of in that big regard, which is what everybody here is thinking. Is it going to be on State or 3rd Street?
Again, you're talking about dispensaries, and that's why I think that the original
Right.
suggestion you made makes sense, that some of this we could deal with fairly easily. The public seemed to be overwhelmingly talking about dispensaries also, so maybe we can deal with the other uses, put them to bed, and then come to the dispensaries, which is the more controversial point.
Agreed.
Yeah. So, yeah, I would be comfortable with going through the medical and the production.
Do we want to take a straw poll here, though? I mean, there is some frustration, I mean, on how we proceed. I mean, obviously, I think, I don't know, does anybody disagree with David that we should at least define the terms tonight?
I think we have to define the terms, or we are at some risk if somebody wants to come in with this type of use after January 1 and we don't have it defined, right? The definitions need to be added to the ordinance.
I think that's part of the opt-out.
But even if you opt out, you still have to have those definitions in your,
Right.
so that somebody can't say, I'm replacing a shoe store with a dispensary. You don't talk about it in your zoning, so it's another retail use, right?
Take a close proxy to what's already in the list. And
Right.
Don't have any close proxies
Right,
to what
right.
these uses are.
Exactly.
So, yeah, take a very broad view of what the allowed use would be.
So whatever comes out of this body tonight or in next month or whenever we decide to culminate here, has to at least include the definitions.
I mean, do you guys want to make a motion in that regard and see how it goes?
To place the,
definitions?
where would the
Just define
definitions
and-
go? Into the what? Where would they be?
Zoning definition.
Into the zoning? I mean,
Chapter 2 of the zoning ordinance, where we define
oh, okay, under the definitions,
Uses
all
and
the
terms.
definitions, okay.
Define
Got
all
it,
the uses.
got it.
I mean, I could stage this or set it up so it's kind of an opt-out, but I also don't think it's unhealthy to do the what if. My personal opinion, though, is that if I was to do a what-if, I would look at the growers and cultivators to be designated in some industrial areas in town, that I think that their existence there would not even be obvious to the typical citizen. But as far as dispensaries, I would probably set it up initially so that they would probably not be allowed. I wouldn't include them in any area. And we can, 3 years from now or 5 years from now, if when we see how this plays out and what it does to the fabric of cities, we can always come back and amend that. We don't have to be in the dance, when the first note's played, so.
Right. I agree. Aside from the dispensaries, I would let the other uses fit in somewhere in a limited way, and the dispensaries not allow at this point, anywhere.
How do we know? How do we know by permitting the other use, the cultivation? What does that mean?
Well, it says.
The state of Illinois has no history right now of what that means.
Actually, they do. There are cultivators for medical marijuana right now.
Gotcha.
It's an agricultural process by and large, and it is heavily regulated. If you go on the Illinois Department of Agriculture, you can see where licensed cultivators are located. And yes, there are some that are contemplated to be located in urban areas as well. It is indoor farming, for lack of a better term.
Do we know if there'll be the same regulation for the recreational as there is for medical? I can understand that there might be more regulation for medical.
There is, again, good, bad, right or wrong, and I
Right.
certainly understand the skepticism about the state's regulatory capacities. I think that's fair skepticism. With respect to medical cannabis, there are several years' experience in cultivating, transporting, yes, some infusion, and medical dispensary licensure and process. As David said earlier, some medical licensees got a leg up and have now obtained already dispensary and cultivating licenses because of their experience in the recreational realm too, come January 1. Again, if you go to the Department of Illinois Professional Regulation or Agriculture, you can see all these maps of where licenses are expected. And one of the things we didn't talk about today, the council will have to wrestle with, is the state is the exclusive license agency. So even if Geneva decided they wanted to have 2 dispensaries and some cultivating licenses, if no licensee came and presented him or her or itself already having a license, then those sites just sit there. I mean, they have to be licensed first. And it is contemplated to be very regulated.
If we address the dispensary, or excuse me, the growers and the cultivators, we also might want to consider, at least initially, and this can always be changed later, limiting the number. We might want to allow 1 of each in town, and that's it, to start. I don't know.
Would this body have the ability to specify only medical? I mean, maybe we should allow 1 medical dispensary and see how it goes, Maybe that's a way to,
We would go down the line and we would recommend,
We can recommend whatever we want.
yeah, on those.
It's a recommendation, so, I mean, we just have to think through what we're comfortable doing.
So we're looking at Chapter 2.
Chapter 2 is, I think that one,
It's just
I'm pretty
definitions.
confident we better do something with Chapter 2, or we're wide open. So, we better do something, otherwise it'll be kind of decided for us by some other, or we'll be litigating it.
The proposed amendments to Chapter 2 begin on page 2 of the report, and it's just defining those different terms for craft growers, cultivation centers, dispensing organizations, infusers, processing centers, and transporters, both recreational and medical.
And those definitions are generally consistent with the state's definitions?
Right.
Okay. Okay.
Figured they were. When the state goes on record as something, yeah, you stay pretty close.
Why don't we get that done? Why don't we have a motion to
Let's do that.
recommend adopting these definitions?
Okay. Acts for the text amendment, so that's one we could do.
Okay, I'm going to try this. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to add text amendments to Chapter 2, the definitions of the Geneva City Code related to the recreational and medical cannabis uses, subject to the findings of fact in the report and the definitions listed starting on page 2 of the report.
That's sufficient.
Second.
Moved and seconded, Celeste. Yeah, section 2. Check.
Okay, debates?
Aye.
Evans?
Aye.
Kasserag?
Aye.
Mead?
Aye.
Rittenhouse?
Aye.
Slivka?
Aye.
Stocking?
Aye. Okay, that's easy.
So at least we did something, right? It's progress.
We did what we really had to do.
Yes. So, I keep going back to these visual aids. We do the easy ones.
Yeah, I would, let's just keep going from easiest to the more difficult ones to get whatever we can out of the way.
The map on the screen is the map of the industrial areas, and again, those yellow circles represent a 1,500-foot radius. That 1,500 feet requires separation between dispensing organizations and between craft growers.
So, this is, wait, we're not talking dispensers now. You're talking about growers and cultivation.
Well, as,
The craft grower.
if we take out the dispensing organization, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, we just want to talk about.
So I'm just talking about where could, I guess this would be craft growers. We can switch, is this craft growers and cultivation centers? Are they,
No, they're separate.
because it says below that, it says growers
We have
and
another map that
cultivation.
has the cultivation.
Cultivation's on the last page.
Okay,
The buffer requirement by the state is that it has to be 1,500 feet away from another craft grower and another craft, or another cultivation center. So that's why it's titled that way.
Oh, okay.
okay, so this page is just for craft growers.
So this is the production side of things.
Each of those yellow circles and purple areas is an industrial area where, as proposed, it would allow us special use for craft grower, processing, infuser, transporter.
Okay, and I'm not slow on the uptake, I don't think, but I just want to make sure I understand what areas craft growers would be allowed in. Is it the blue areas on there or the purple areas?
Yes.
So are we saying it's allowed on Delnor?
No.
Theoretically, isn't that
I should get
a?
back at the wheel.
South of Delmar.
Yeah.
That's an OR
No,
district.
no, Delnor's right there.
You're right.
Yeah, but
That's an OR district, not, that's an
Okay.
office research.
Okay,
one.
because I just want to know, it's worth taking the time to deliberately know which of those spots they could go in.
So let's zoom in here. So really, that's OR is the Delnor campus. That's not an industrial
Right.
district.
So it's just industrial, so it's over
So
by.
really just where those
It's just the
purple
circle.
areas are, where the yellow circles are.
Just the yellow circles is where it would be allowed.
Okay, so you've got the industrial park, the East Side Industrial Park, you've got, over by
Glengarry behind south of
East of
McDonald's,
McDonald's and Glengarry, right? You've got Campana,
north of Campana, yeah.
north of Campana.
Got Burgess on South Street and
Oh,
Western Avenue.
sure,
And then Gary Lane.
right, we're just south of the church and next to the candy shop, right?
So with the
Right.
buffer to the residential, like if you take the Burgess site, for example, there's housing right across the street.
Right,
So I don't understand
How-
the where's the buffer?
Well, I guess the buffer's on there,
It
but
looks like the
it's,
buffer's inside
Yeah,
the Burgess site.
it does creep into that, so.
so that's, as you've drawn it, that's accurate? I mean, it comes 150
Doesn't
feet?
doesn't make sense to me. The buffer's on the site and it's not.
Because we've got the new subdivision going in there. It's, you go 150 feet across the street.
So, again, and that 150-foot buffer is for illustration purposes. That's not a state requirement, so we can eliminate the buffer requirement. And
Oh,
just
I
say,
like the
No, I don't
buffer.
wanna
I like the
eliminate it. I
buffer.
just don't understand why it looks like the buffer
Inside the site.
is
So
inside the
essentially-
site and not
because it,
outside the
If
site.
it's the property line, then it can't be allowed there,
well,
right?
because the buffer's from the residential area.
Right,
So it's coming from the residential area creeping into the industrial
right,
site.
right.
So they
So it
just have
really
to be
wouldn't
in
be
the s-
allowed on this site because it's
Oh, it
within
wouldn't. It's not like
150
you could
feet.
put it in the center of that
So it wouldn't be
site.
allowed over here either.
Right.
Looks like there's very limited opportunity on Gary Lane as well with that 150-foot buffer. You could see it kind of crosses into those sites. You do have some
Well,
opportunity.
David, just say,
I
we
don't-
we say
I'm
very,
confused.
it almost looks like it can't be on the Gary Lane side either, just because it comes into the parcel.
Right, yeah, there's not much opportunity there. All those parcels are within 150 feet.
So, okay, so getting back to the Burgess Norton site, that's one parcel.
Right.
Okay, so would it be allowed anywhere on that parcel or not because of the buffer?
It wouldn't.
It wouldn't.
Because
So
it's property line, it's
where-
not,
Can you tell us where in Geneva this would be allowed? Because I thought it was in those circles, but it seems that it's
there
not.
might be parcels in that circle.
So,
that-
no,
'cause
because this is important. Where is it
So,
that we're allowing it?
Can I just ask, but David, so you're saying though that it's only not allowed because of the 150-foot buffer,
Right.
right,
which is not a state requirement?
right.
No,
So that's a requirement we'd be putting on it.
right. So
Correct.
with that requirement, where would it be allowed?
So with a 150-foot buffer requirement, there are some parcels off of Soderquist and
Okay, I can see that.
Old Caneville that could be eligible.
Where did the 150 come from, Dave?
We just started testing buffer distances, and that was one that provided some opportunity. Once you get beyond that, you really are limiting any opportunity.
Looks like you might have
So you have
something down
some opportunity maybe in that area north of Campana. Some opportunity off of Glengarry.
All right, because the
Commerce,
Burgess
and then-
Norton and
Opportunities in the industrial park.
the Burgess Norton site and the Gary Lane site were the sites that concerned me the most because I think they are very proximate to residential.
Right.
Without a
Those other
doubt.
sites are not
With that
so
buffer, they
much.
would not be eligible.
Right.
Right, so if you can't really do it on the Burgess Norton or the Gary Lane, I feel a little better about that.
And let's think about the user. This is a craft grower. So the only people that will be going in and out of this property will be the employees and then the transporter that transports it from the grower to an end, to a dispensary somewhere, right?
Right.
So this is not, it's not near foot traffic. It's not gonna have, it's not gonna be very visible to a resident or to
And it's
someone passing
inside.
through the community. And it's,
You
right,
grow it
right,
indoors.
right.
Was
So
it
it's
craft
not like
grower
a field.
500 square feet?
5,000.
5,000 maximum.
5,000.
Right.
Dave, can a crafter can't be next to another crafter?
They can't be within 1,500 feet of another craft grower, so that's what the yellow circle is that 1,500 feet. So when you look at this area off Soderquist, if you have one, you're only going to have one.
One.
The state would not allow another one
Might get a
within that
couple
yellow
on
circle.
east side.
So
That's the
what-
same on Glengarry and Batavia Avenue.
So we got 6 circles up there. If we rule out Gary Lane and Burgess Norton, our recommendation to this city council would be, these are the 4 that would make sense.
Well,
Right.
and can we take it one step further? Do we initially want to limit the absolute number, 1 or 2 in total?
Does it matter? Well, I mean, this is where I think the number of dispensaries makes a difference.
I
But
agree.
if you're gonna allow craft growers, and I'm not saying whether you should or you shouldn't, does it really matter how many of them there are? If we've cited them in this way and it's all internal and there's no traffic and
You know,
what's
I
the
think
difference?
optically and personally to me, because we're early on in this journey, it feels like if we allowed 1 or 2 and then that worked out, we could always again take that limitation off 5 years from now. But if you end up with 4 and it doesn't work, and it's a formula that doesn't work for the city for some reason, I don't know what that would be, then you've got 4. But if you allow 1 or 2,
Right, I think I mean, again, the recommendation at least was to allow them by special use, so
So you could say.
you're
is it-
evaluating each
can
one
you-
on a case-by-case
Can you deny a
basis.
special use if it meets all the criteria by saying, well, we've already got 2 of those, we don't want a third? That's not a valid.
That's not, right. But I guess if it's meeting the 9 special use criteria and it's meeting these buffer
what's the problem?
requirements, then,
The problem is that I guess, we don't know what this does to our town or to the fabric. I think it's much more prevalent or much more worrisome on the dispensary side, but I just don't know what a grower does and who. I'm envisioning it's 4 or 5 employees and, they use a lot of electricity and nobody goes in and out and a truck shows up after a crop is harvested, right? So.
Well, clearly, we can the city, St. Charles limited, I guess that's dispensaries. but
Right.
They said 2, some of these others have said a number, so I don't know why you couldn't do it for the growers.
For me, the growers and the craft growers and the infusers, I think it's just opportunity for businesses to locate in Geneva. I don't really, I do want the buffers, I do want to, stay away from schools and all that kind of stuff, but this is just simple economic opportunity that we're letting people have in the city. I mean, I agree, you're not going to even know they're there, I think, like you said at first, John, unless you, and if I don't know, can't imagine they want much signage, but maybe we could put in something about signage too. I don't know.
well, the state does have restrictions on signage as well, that it can't contain like the marijuana leaf and it can't advertise towards children or make medical claims, anything like that, so there are some restrictions imposed by the state.
And these aren't available for retail sales at all,
Right.
it's all wholesale, right? Whatever's
yeah.
done in the growing, cultivation, infuser facilities, right?
Right, if we were to say dispensing is not allowed, that would be correct.
So along your lines about trying to limit it,
Yeah.
what about looking at possibly the least invasive location? So the northeast, where you have the most opportunity because of space, it's the most remote as it relates to the rest of the population.
But we can't just say northeast, we have to pick a zoning district, right? And
Right.
that's I-1, which is what all of these other ones are too.
Right.
So we can't limit it in only certain parts of a zoning district?
Right,
Yeah,
you either have
the
to pick a
entire
zoning district, but not specific properties.
Not spot, does that be
Right.
spot zoning or
Exactly.
something? Okay.
So in this example, we could recommend to eliminate 2 out of the 6, and the other 4 would be available, and we can also limit that to, our recommendation would be only allow 1 craft grower out of the 4 available sites.
You could.
We can do that.
And again, you can always
I would
revisit
not
it later,
be
but
supportive of that personally.
you what?
I would not be supportive of limiting the number of growers or infusers in our city. I'm all for the buffers and all that, but I want to allow businesses to locate here.
Yeah, I agree with Brad. I don't see this as being detrimental to the city. I think with the buffers, we can keep it from the sites where there's even any concern, but some of these others, and if you want to limit it to just the east, then we can make the buffers even bigger so that the one in the east is the only one that could conceivably work.
Well, okay, so I'm with you. I got it. But as we go through each one of these and we get to dispensaries, I think maybe we should just have that straw poll or whatever you were talking about, like with dispensaries. I mean, are we going to recommend to the city council there's not a good area in Geneva for a dispensary?
Okay.
Or are we strictly going to go through each one of these and say, based on the zoning, this is what we would recommend if you guys decide to do it?
We could say there's no place for a dispensary.
Sure.
And that could be part of your recommendation.
I'm prepared to do that.
I do.
Yeah. We were just trying to whittle through the
I think
easier
we're getting
ones.
headed in that direction,
Okay,
or some of us are.
so we're going to take this one first?
We can,
I think it was up there, that's why we started
We
there.
were kind of trying to do the
Well, this was
easier
supposed to be the easy one.
John, you're a good reader.
All right, so say something, John, and we'll vote it up or down.
Well, how do people feel about limiting the number? I appreciate that you want businesses to come in. I just feel like as I said, we're at the early stages of this journey. I'd rather limit it, and we can always loosen it later. You can't tighten it later if 4 come in and that for some reason they don't work, but.
I'm not seriously opposed to that. If that's the consensus of the group, I can go
So
along
maybe
with it.
before we craft something, how do folks feel?
I don't know if I would limit it to 1, maybe 2.
What if we
I
did,
like the number 4 more than,
I'm sorry, what if we did
I'm not
increase,
up for
what if,
limiting.
I mean, David, what if we increase the buffer to 200 feet? Does that then knock that third site out? Then we're down to 3 sites?
What would that
Which
knock out?
third side?
I'm thinking it might knock the one over
Canada?
on Caneville, or the furthest west.
the Sutterquist one.
150? I thought current was
So
150.
200,
She's saying if we
If we
made it
did
more.
200, it might,
250 feet still allows for some of those
Okay.
there.
there. And then still allows, maybe not, on Batavia Avenue.
Oh.
I'm going the opposite. Okay.
Still allows for some on Glengarry.
So it'd be on the east side industrial.
If you bump that up, no, I think the next map I did was 500 feet.
Those folks are going to love us.
What does that look like again?
That eliminates
Basically,
Sutterquist, that
it's
eliminates.
everything except the east side.
Maybe one parcel on the corner there of Commerce and Glengarry, but everything but the industrial park
That would be a way to push it just to the east.
would be a 500-foot buffer.
But if we did that, and then it worked out really well out in the east, and there were other businesses that wanted to come in, we would have no opportunities for them at all.
Right.
So we kind of,
I think also,
Amend it, you could
could've
go back.
rezoned, yeah.
then we
You
just
could
amend
change the 500 to
make the
150
buffer-
and it puts
So how
those
would-
other 2 sites.
How would that
back.
happen? Would a petitioner then say,
it could be a city initiated, or it could be an applicant that comes forward. Right. But it could be initiated by an applicant or by the city. I do want to point out that the I-1 area that we have at the northeast corner, you could see these numbers, 16, 20, 21, those are all PUDs. So we might need to amend those PUDs beyond the zoning change. So while what we're talking about would allow them in I-1, it might not allow them on these sites because of the PUDs. These other areas are not part of a planned unit development, so we wouldn't have that issue in those areas.
So
so
back,
then, remind me then, so then how would that work with the PUDs?
So if the planned unit development has a specific list of permitted uses, and cannabis is not one of them, which it won't be, they would have to come back and petition the city to change their list of permitted uses to allow for it.
Who's they, exactly?
The applicant, whoever's looking to locate there. Property owner, contract purchaser.
So like, I'm
Potential
just trying to
tenant.
picture like, just in recent history with Greenhouse Point. That's what it's called, right? So that's a PUD, right?
That
It's on
wasn't
here.
actually, that was,
No, it's just a.
that was just a subdivision.
Oh, that's just a
They
subdivision.
rezoned it and then
Oh, okay.
subdivided.
Maybe
right.
that's probably why I'm getting confused on it then, okay. So then,
But a good example would be like the Overwise site.
so back to
Like,
150.
and if they had a use that wasn't listed in their original PUD, let's say, I don't know what it
You'd
would
have
be.
4
a
left.
flower shop.
Spenga was a special use that
Yeah.
came in.
Then they'd have to go in and actually, ask
I
for
just
that
don't want to limit it to
particular
just one. I
amendment
suppose you get one guy as a
to allow that use to come in, because it's not listed in
but it-
Kills it for
but we're
everybody.
kind of implying
For a little-
that they're welcome to come in and ask for that
So-
amendment.
Yeah, if it's
The nature of the
by
allowing-
right of
And I'd be
zoning, or
fine with
not
the
by
4.
right, but by allowing it in a
Yeah, I'm
district,
trying to
yes,
get
it's
there.
sort of like communicating where
Yeah.
we're
Not Geneva.
open to that.
Yeah.
So
What's-
it's unlikely we would
Truly
say no.
opposed to carrying
David, what's the, so then,
But I can see
moving
where
down the
some-
line to the infusers,
because
are they
of
not
proximity
allowed to be in proximity to the growers?
There's no restriction from the state on infusers or processors in terms of buffer distances
Okay.
It's gonna
from other cannabis
Other-
establishments.
Okay.
So, So this is craft growers is what we're talking about.
Can we
5,000 square foot facility.
Yep.
It's a grower, their client is a dispensary. Somebody transports it. No consumers of the product are ever on site.
Yep.
I guess I could back off the limiting the number if that's, we've only got 4. Well, I mean, I'm just trying to be practical because we're gonna have some tougher decisions on these other uses. But that's 4 sites that they could be. I don't know what the demand for, craft growers are. It's like Penrose,
Well, they have to get licenses too, and there's a limited number of
Right,
licenses.
right.
They've got to go through
Right.
the
Seems to me
gauntlet.
be unlikely you'd get 4 of them in
Right.
town.
I mean, the big hurdle's going to go
Yeah,
through
I
the state
think-
licensing requirement. When they get to us, where they're
Right.
Correct. So just if we said the 4, still, when someone petitions, they gotta come.
Right.
And then
We have
you gotta
a
meet all
separate
9.
public hearing for each one.
Yes.
So you're gonna have all these neighbors within a 500
Oh,
foot radius say,
And we're gonna
"There's
have
no
to,
way that.
we're gonna have to make a decision at
Okay,
that time.
so I say what my recommendation would be, get rid of the Gary Lane, get rid of the other one.
Yeah.
Open up to the 4, but recommend no more than 2 craft growers. That would be my recommendation.
Well, we can't
So-
get rid of Gary Lane, but by the buffer, it right, because it falls into that zoning.
Yeah, you can get rid of, you can just say.
With the
it's not-
buffer.
With the buffer, you get rid of it. You can't just say no.
What buffer would you recommend?
Well, the buffer as proposed was 150 feet from residential, and that eliminated Gary Lane
And Burgess.
So David, I'm not,
and Burgess Norton.
Those are
I
the
trust
two.
all the work you did, but I just want to make sure. These buffers that are shown there, they're measured from an actual property line from residential or from street center or?
Property line of a residential.
Property, so the house is across the street from Burgess, crosses the street and comes, and if it crosses the property line of a parcel, that parcel is ineligible.
Would be,
That's
right,
how we're writing this, right?
right.
Okay. I just want to be able to trust the buffers, and I do, I think now's the time to be deliberate.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are the 2 sites that I think we can put those off the table.
How do we,
And the 250-foot buffer doesn't have make a market difference in the areas, the other
The
areas?
250, I think, eliminated,
The other 2.
where was it?
it's almost,
Isn't
It's
that
everything on the
the
east.
I think
you could get a little one. over there.
Municipal League's recommendation is 250 in their document?
Is it?
Which one is?
The municipal leagues, he says.
The one that,
The one that he gave us.
They had a model ordinance for
Yeah.
also opting in. And I think they had recommended 250 feet.
Where's the minute, what's he looking at? Is he looking at the handout?
No, this was,
It was one of the
Mr.
links at
O'Halloran
the end of
gave
the
us-
report.
no, this is.
Oh, okay.
You got it over there.
I
Yeah,
printed
yeah.
that out too. I read a
I
lot
was
of that. You got into more detail than I did, but. that's
All right,
this.
all right. So we're gonna do a separate motion on each of these then?
And he just gave
Well,
us the
that's what I was
opt-out
wondering. Can
one,
we-
but there's also an
Can we
opt-in.
put
Okay,
the
got it.
diffusers and
Where you want to go.
The
whatever
buffers
in?
or,
Can we lump everything other than the dispensaries into this set of rules, same set of rules, and handle?
it was 250.
Yeah, we could
So-
certainly do it that way. I mean, if the feeling is the same for,
what are our other uses? We're talking about infusers. Now, we do have a party, if I watched the city council meeting correctly, there's a.
I thought about him.
Yeah, there's,
Yeah,
I forget it,
Silvestri.
Silvestri, he has the candy shop, and he provides candies for the medical marijuana business, but he ships them off-site and they infuse them at their site. He'd like to be able to do that on his site. Unfortunately for him, he's right across from a church. How do we feel about that? Having the THC product on site, that close to,
that's,
it's not residential, right? But there's,
that's right on Gary Lane, so that falls
Correct.
into that buffer zone.
but that's a 250 you got up there, right?
That's the
So
250.
the only way
So
we
if you
could
go-
allow him to do that, if we wanted
Do-
to, would be to not lump the infusers into the same category as the craft growers, but to let them have a bigger buffer?
Or no
Or
buffer.
no
No
buffer.
No buffer.
But then
I don't know if we wanna
that
do
carries
that.
to other I-1s.
Yeah, right, so I'm not sure
So
we could
if
do
he
that.
wanted to do that, could he still apply and seek can you get a variance for a buffer? For a, I mean, how would that work? I mean, he just would not be able to
He
do it.
wouldn't be eligible.
Okay,
Right.
okay.
I mean,
So we'd have to go back to a zero buffer.
if we want to
But then you
accommodate
will,
him.
Just
then
for
you,
that
that
matter.
affects every other I-1.
Yeah,
That is not probably the zoning process.
Yeah,
Right.
I don't think we should.
Agreed.
zero buffer.
I just happen to know of a party and I'm like,
yeah.
I'm not suggesting, I'm just, do, I'm just,
no, I just want to make sure, could that party end up doing this? And what I'm hearing is no. Okay,
Not at that location.
yep.
Correct, not at
Okay.
that location.
Right.
I could live, I think the infuser's similar. There no consumer on site. There's transporters coming and employees coming.
Right. And it's all interior. Yeah.
So maybe you were suggesting consolidating infusers and what other ones?
Everything other than the dispensaries.
Infusers are cultivators, I guess technically is the definition, right?
No, infusers aren't cultivators.
No,
Aren't they?
craft growers are cultivators.
Yeah.
Well, hang on.
Infusers
Yeah,
are,
infusers are infusers.
yeah.
They are a facility operated by an organization of business that's licensed.
So, oh, there we go, the infusers.
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
So I'm
Concentrate.
saying everything except the dispensaries could have the same regulation.
So, okay.
They'd all be in the industrial zones, they'd all have that
And-
250, is that what we decided on, 250-foot buffer?
So we have,
Did we decide on that? Because
I don't remember if we decided on
We're-
that or not.
we have a 150 buffer.
150 was enough?
I thought it, because it knocked out,
Right, we didn't
Gary
want to
Lane
knock
and-
out everything. We
Right.
just want to knock out those two.
What about processing? I think that's the only one we haven't
what,
mentioned.
now what's a process?
The processor would extract the chemical compound. They could also be an infuser, is my understanding.
Okay.
Where an infuser just takes that chemical concentrate and puts it in.
So one takes it out, the other puts it in.
And transport, so, yeah.
And transfer.
And again, I'm
Transport.
thinking through who's going to be on site. Are transporters going to be located somewhere? Would we allow a transporter to have,
If you
they'd
go-
have a truck facility or whatever? they-
Page 8, or the proposed amendments to the industrial districts, list, what was proposed was all cannabis business establishments as a special use, including transporting.
Okay,
The discussion I'm hearing is we want to take out minimally the dispensing organizations.
Right.
yes.
Is a transporter, is this just like, does the cannabis ever go through the transporting facility? Or is this just essentially where they store their trucks and their employees in their
I
office?
think it's,
And then
believe
they go
that's-
one place,
I would
take
think
it to
that-
another
It is
place.
the licensed transportation, singular transportation method between cultivators, infusers, processors, and dispensaries.
There's not like a sorting facility.
I
like
would
UPS
doubt that they
or
would be able to
Warehouse,
take
I think it
the
goes-
cargo back to their own facility.
The whole idea of this product is, from its inception and growth, is it is identified and identifiable, licensed, and goes from other licensed facilities and can be traced all the way to a dispensary and to ultimately a customer. And that transportation mechanism is the connector, that's the concept.
So what I'm hearing from my suggestion is a transporter could really be almost anywhere. Because there, I mean, really doesn't have anything to do with anything.
It's similar to like how you do busing, I mean, like how you have commercial bus or school bus companies where you want them maybe in certain areas because they have 100 buses or something like that.
Oh, okay.
So just for your consideration.
Right. I mean, that would be a special use again, so we'd be considering, do we want 100 trucks?
They're probably good-looking trucks.
Right. They probably have nothing on them either. You don't want,
Nothing on them.
Probably
Yeah,
in-
they don't want to advertise
right, right.
what they're transporting.
So we've got transporters, processors, infusers, cultivators, and growers.
Right.
I just look at that as all on the production.
I think from from how it impacts the city in their uses and who goes there, it seems very similar.
Some of them are small business producers.
Right.
Some of them are larger scale producers.
There's no
And
interaction
there's-
between the public and
And-
any of these.
Right, and I don't think there's an incentive to advertise what you're doing in those four walls,
You're not
because,
selling it there.
well, you don't want folks to break in or whatever, you know.
They're a perfect I-1 use.
So I think you almost could lump those together. And we're still talking 150, right, because it cut out Gary Lane and.
It's my understanding, right?
Okay,
So far.
so
Which one is the one that requires 200,000?
Cultivation center requires the 2,500-foot buffer from all residential areas.
And we only had one area on the east side that would,
Maybe,
maybe, okay.
I'm trying to find that
That's
map
the
here.
really
That's
large
that
scale
map.
production.
So can we rule that out?
We can.
Okay.
Rule it out, like
What do you
not
mean
allow
rule
it?
we're not gonna have those in.
We're just not gonna have it because it's,
It's not feasible.
Do we, given
I thought it could go there.
But
Well, if you look at the, where'd it go?
It's the big blob.
The
There
big
you
blob.
go.
Wait, what's the big blob?
So the big blob is
2,500.
the buffer for cultivation centers.
So it fits in that one little purple box.
Yeah, one little purple box, but we did not take into account any residential zoning that might be to the north in St. Charles.
in other communities.
So how would that work? We would notice the residents in the neighboring town, they would be able to come in and have a voice, right?
Yeah, it's property owners within 500 feet.
Right.
Regardless of what community.
Yeah, they're gonna get noticed.
But if we annex that parcel lower that David was talking about, then that
True.
could open up a whole.
Right, there could be some potential there. But there's also residential uses off Cherry Lane, kind of
Yeah.
across from the ice rink there. There's some residential uses there that we're looking to annex to, so that might increase the buffer further and eliminate that as a possibility. So if the desire is to just eliminate it, I don't think we're losing much potential.
I mean, I personally don't feel like Geneva needs to be a place for a large-scale cannabis
I'm fine with
production
it.
facility.
Yeah, I was just trying to understand it.
Eliminating it.
That's essentially what we're talking about with the cultivator, right? I mean, this is
Up
big
to
time.
210,000 square feet,
Yeah.
right.
That's a lot.
So,
Okay, Jim.
Oh, man.
Well, before you make a motion, can I
Well,
ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
Ron, I don't know if, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but do we need to provide some opportunity for a medical dispensary within the corporate limits?
Do we need to?
Right, I know recreational, we have the option not to, but do we have that same option with medical dispensaries?
Okay, so you gave me the option of disclaiming this because I want to do research. I don't believe we have to do that.
Okay.
But I don't know that to a degree of certainty, but I feel confident.
Okay.
So I'll research that.
Okay.
I think our only requirement was that we consider it.
Okay.
I don't know that we have to.
Zone for it, right?
And we would say that would also be a special use, right?
Right.
Yes.
So we'll have a bite at the apple.
So if I'm understanding the conversation so far, if we're looking at page 8 of the report, the consideration is to amend the I-1 Light Industrial District and I-2 General Industrial District to include all of the uses listed with the exception of dispensing organizations and cultivation centers.
Except dispensing.
if and when we do that annexation, would that likely be I-1?
I guess it depends if we have a user in hand at the time of annexation and what zoning they would need. But it is planned for industrial use, so it'd be I-1 or I-2.
And what's the difference?
I-2 allows for some heavier industrial uses that I-1 doesn't, but I don't see there any of these as heavy industrial uses.
Well, I just want to throw this out there. Should we consider allowing medical dispensaries? Is there a reason not to allow that? It has to be by prescription?
I feel like we should, but
I don't know where the one
And
in
I-
St. Charles is. Does anybody know where it is, or
I don't know where,
problem?
I feel
I
like
know
it was
where
on
it
the
is.
east side.
It's kind of like by the Target, the Super Target.
On the east side?
That industrial area behind there?
Steinmart and stuff back in there. Is it in the industrial area?
Ohio
cut through all there all the
Street, but
time,
I think
and I
it's
don't-
Illinois
I
Street.
thought it was Illinois.
Yeah.
But I thought it was closer to like 25, but maybe not. I know, thought I heard Illinois is.
Is closer to Kirk.
Okay.
So I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this.
Well, are we including the medical dispensary?
I'm just throwing out there for discussion. I'm not advocating
And
one
that
way or
would be in the
other. I just
industrial
thought we ought to
Right.
talk about it a
Not-
little
Not the
bit.
commercial districts, the
Yeah,
industrial.
I would agree to leave, to include medical in the industrial area. I would leave it in.
Are we deciding we're not allowing dispensaries? Is that what we're
Except
kind
for,
of?
what
except
that
for-
would mean then is we don't allow recreational dispensaries, but
Well, we
we
haven't
allow
gotten to
medical.
that yet, though.
That's what I'm asking, or is that what we're discussing now? I'm confused.
Well, we would be allowing it if we left it in, if we left
Yeah.
medical
Right.
dispensaries
He's
in here,
talking
we
about
would
the
be allowing it.
recreational ones, though.
Right, we're discussing what to cross off of the list on page 8. And we said the cultivation centers and the recreational dispensaries seem to be off. So the question is, do we want to leave the medical dispensaries on the list for permitted uses, or do we want it off as well? So undecided, so I'm
So
open
we've
to.
already decided that we're gonna opt out on the recreational?
Well, we haven't, I'm just kind of
Oh, okay.
separating the medical.
We aren't there yet, I guess.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
I was a little confused if we were
Yeah.
making that
But,
decision or not.
but are we trying to, are we trying to simplify and lump all the things besides the recreational dispensaries into one thing
Yeah.
that we will allow all in the same,
I think that was the goal.
Right.
Same rules.
Okay.
Same rules apply.
okay, and so then the medical would fall in with all of these other things?
Right. Is on page 8, is craft growers in there too? They are, yeah.
Yeah.
So we're not gonna allow a cultivation center for no cultivation center at all, but a dispensary,
Right.
so.
Well, I don't think we've decided on whether we want the medical allowed or not. What's a reason not
I
to?
mean, can you prohibit as a town?
Well, he was gonna research it, but if we decide to allow it, then it's not a problem.
Right. The question is, I think the question really is, do we have to consider it? But David asked a deeper question, because it's medical versus recreational. Must we have some area where a dispensary, medical dispensary is available? I don't think that's I don't think we have to, but I'm gonna confirm that through research.
Okay. So I'm asking.
Clearly, if you want to,
It's not a question, but, so I'm asking, what are the reasons to not have a medical dispensary? What are the issues with that?
Because there's already one in St. Charles, there's one in North Aurora. I have a friend who needs that, and he goes to North Aurora. And has not complained about driving there.
But there are people that may need it, and it might be good for them to have something more convenient. I don't have an issue with the medical at all. And I think it gets us in the door in terms of, figuring out, seeing how it works, or how,
Again, it gives some flexibility and opportunity, to evaluate it in the future. Again,
Is the,
And it's only in those 4 locations.
what's the word, co-inhabit, co-locate a medical dispensary and a recreational dispensary?
I'm not
Yeah.
sure about that.
Not per our zoning, if we
I mean,
if we go that
No,
way,
but
right?
through the state, yes, and those are the early bird licenses that we were talking about earlier, is the medical dispensaries are the first ones to be able to obtain a recreational.
Dispensaries, they're not commingled.
Right.
I'm sorry?
Different doors.
Well, you're right, they're just the licensees that are, the license recipients that were already in place for medical dispensaries were given an opportunity to get recreational licenses in advance of others because of their experience. But they're not single-place facilities, they're distinct.
Okay.
Right. I mean, they have separate operations.
okay.
it's just a license.
But they could be next door to each other.
I think they, depending on the zoning, but, right,
Yeah.
they're separate locations. Perhaps they could be next door to each other in Chicago if their zoning permits.
Where I was going with that is, it doesn't really affect the zoning part, but I wonder if most people are gonna wanna try to do both to maximize their sales. So if we only allow one and not the other, what's the likelihood that we'll get one? An applicant that only wants to sell medical marijuana.
Well, if they don't do it, then
I know,
they
I
don't
know,
do it.
yeah.
It's not really our
Yeah.
issue. Might be true.
Personally, I think I'm okay, I just want to go on the record with a dispensary for recreational way out of town. Not downtown, but like go all the way out there. I'm okay with, just, again, just talking out loud here, limiting it to one or two at the most, but one even, and see how it goes. I just want to throw that out there.
I don't think our zoning allows you to have just one location way out of town, unless you create a buffer so big that you can only be crossing the
But we
airport.
could limit the number
You can
of
limit-
any of
You
these.
can limit the number, but if you went the 150 buffer, they could put it over here behind Geneva
Oh, I
Eye,
see what you
Geneva
mean.
Eye Clinic.
But we can do different buffers for different uses, can't we?
Could.
My vote would be to revisit recreational dispensaries years down the road if we think we want to get into that.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable, revisiting it is reasonable for what the community wants and all that.
I-
I think,
Yeah, I think city council's
I
going to
think
hear much more of the same.
right.
And
I think
more,
it's
probably.
It's a compromise that fits what the community's asking for, to let that wait.
You can see what it's done to St. Charles, you can see what it's done to
Right.
other communities, and
Yeah.
then make a decision, a more thoughtful decision.
That's right. I think that makes sense.
And I'm sure you can even, yeah, you're gonna be able to see what they're doing revenue-wise because of it too.
Right. Revenue-wise, traffic-wise, accident-wise, crime-wise, all that stuff.
So what do we decide about medical? Is it in or out?
I'm okay with it.
I think it's fine.
I think it's all right.
Say in.
All right, so then the only thing we're eliminating from the list on page 8 are the cultivators and recreational dispensary.
Okay.
Okay, they got easier.
Can I ask you a question? So
Sure.
we have the request that include the definitions, we're done with that.
Right.
It then includes Chapter 3, general zoning provisions, that's going to stay in there. Then it chooses Chapter 4A, downtown district, I'm going to take that out, because we're not talking about any changes to that.
Well, I guess maybe we should just go chapter by chapter.
Probably should. just make
Right now,
sure.
we're on chapter 7. Maybe we should just knock that one out and then circle back to those.
Sure.
Okay.
Chapter 7 is page 8, right?
Right. You break it up, it'll make it easier to.
And what I've got coming out of Chapter 7 is, if you look at the list, it's the second one down is the Cannabis Cultivation Center Medical, Cannabis Cultivation Center Recreational, those two line items.
Yes.
Then skip one and go down to what's coming out as Cannabis Dispensing Organization Recreational. That will not be allowed.
Right,
The balance of the list is allowed,
right.
because it's processing, infusing, transportation, and cultivation.
So we could have a motion to approve the amendments to chapter 7 as shown on page 8 with the exception of those uses.
Okay. At some point, we have to motion for the Chapter 3 stuff, or we're going to do that
And
later.
then we circle back to that.
Okay.
Getting there.
Piecemeal's okay. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to request the text amendments to Chapter 7 of the Office Research Industrial Districts of the Geneva City Code as delineated on page 8 of the staff report, except that the list will not include Cannabis Cultivation Center Medical, Cannabis Cultivation Center Recreational, or Cannabis Dispensing Organization Recreational.
What was the last one, or cannabis?
Dispensing Organization Recreational, subject to the findings of fact contained in the staff report.
Does that apply to both districts, I-1 and I-2?
Uh,
List.
As long as that map applies to I-1 and I-2.
Right.
Yes.
Do we need to mention the buffers in the motion?
No, because it's up here.
That'll be another
It's in
section.
there, okay. Second.
Don't ask me to read it back.
Don't ask me to say it again.
Bates.
Aye.
Evans. Aye. Kasserag.
Aye.
Mead.
Aye.
Rittenhouse.
Aye.
Slivka.
Aye.
Stacking.
Aye.
Okay, so we're done.
Now we back up.
There we go. Okay, so we've done 3. We've done 2.
So
7.
now we can circle back to, well, I guess we should probably take care of chapter 6.
How about
Or
chapter 3?
Chapter 4 and chapter 6. I think chapter 3, once we know where we're not allowing things, we can go back, because there will be some tweaks that need to be made.
So that's last.
All right.
Yeah.
So we could go to chapter 4.
So
Chapter 4 would be the downtown districts. What was proposed for the commercial mixed use and residentially scaled commercial mixed use were dispensing organizations only. So if there's not a desire to consider those,
There would be no changes to that section then, right?
right, we could just take a motion not to adopt those proposed amendments.
Is that the consensus?
Yeah. Strike chapter 4.
Or do we have to make a motion in an affirmative way?
No, you got
Okay,
a motion
okay.
to
All right,
deny the amendments as proposed
okay,
for
okay.
chapter 4.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion for text amendments to Chapter 4A Downtown Districts, that we do not adopt the proposed changes as listed on page 6 of the staff report. And 7, starting on page 6 of the staff report.
Second.
Debates.
Aye.
Evans. Aye. Kasserag.
Aye.
Mead.
Aye.
Rittenhouse.
Aye.
Slivka.
Aye.
Stacking.
Aye.
Chapter 6, where's that?
So chapter 6 would be, again, dispensing organizations and commercial zones. These are primarily along Randall Road and State Street, B1, B4, and B5. So if the desire is not to consider these, similar
Similar
motion would be
motion, okay.
appropriate.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that the text amendments for Chapter 6, Office and Commercial Districts, as shown on page 7, starting on page 7 of the staff report, not be adopted or recommended.
Second.
Second by Slivka. Chapter 6. Debates.
Aye.
Evans. Aye. Kasserag.
Aye.
Mead.
Aye.
Rittenhouse.
Aye.
Slivka.
Aye.
Stacking.
Aye.
Passes.
So we have Chapter 11 and Chapter 3, right?
So chapter 11 was establishing, that begins on page 9 of the report, that was establishing parking requirements.
Right.
We would want to amend that list to delete recreational dispensing organizations
And cultivation centers.
and cultivation centers, correct?
So wait, where is that? Okay, so that's, there we go. So,
Well, we want to leave the medical one in.
yep,
So
Correct.
take out recreational
and
then
cannabis,
both
both cultivations, right?
and the recreational dispensing.
Okay. So we're going to adopt these subject to deleting those two, okay. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that the text amendments related to Chapter 11 off-street parking and loading, traffic, and access regulations of Title 11 zoning of the Geneva City Code, as shown on page 9 of the staff report, with the exception of cannabis dispensing organizations recreational, cannabis cultivation center medical, and cannabis cultivation centers recreational, be adopted.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Celeste?
Aye.
Evans? Aye. Kasserag?
Aye.
Eve?
Aye.
Bittenhouse?
Aye.
Zwicker?
Aye.
Stacky?
Aye.
Now, chapter 3.
All right, now back to chapter 3.
Where is chapter 3?
I just want to scan through this quickly and make sure there's no adjustments that need to be made based on the previous recommendations.
Okay.
A should be fine.
Yeah, I thought it
B
was.
should be fine.
D has mentioned dispensing.
C should be okay. Actually, C we can probably modify to eliminate cultivation center because we're not considering those.
Okay. Out. Okay, recreation.
So D we would need to modify to delete recreational.
So cannabis or, yeah, cannabis medical dispensing, right?
Right.
Out.
And then E would be out altogether.
E's, yeah, out altogether.
And that's it, right?
And then we have F on the following page,
Cannabis.
and that's the 150-foot buffer, so that would apply.
That stays the same.
Okay. Let's try this. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that the text amendments related to Chapter 3 General Zoning Provisions of Title 11 Zoning of the Geneva City Code as shown on, starting on page 3. Okay, 3 of the staff report be adopted with the exception that in item C, cultivation centers, medical and recreational is eliminated. In item D, recreational dispensing organizations are not included. Item E is deleted, and that's it. And item E is deleted.
Is deleted in its entirety.
And in its entirety.
Second.
I'm sorry, who's second? Sorry, I'm better with last names.
That's right, Steve, would you type?
Debates?
Aye.
Evans? Aye. Kasserag?
Aye.
Mead?
Aye.
Bittenhouse?
Aye.
Zwicker?
Aye.
Stacky?
Aye.
Wow,
That does it.
we almost got done by 10.
So
Well, it took us
I will have to confirm with our city administrator about the scheduling of this for city council's consideration. I believe there was consideration for a November 25th special meeting, so it could be the only topic on the agenda.
For the city council?
We will confirm that, and then we will update the website tomorrow with that information.
Thanks, everyone, for your input this evening. We appreciate it.
I have no new business since Tuesday night.
Did she leave this here? I think this.
Move to adjourn here. or-
Oh, move to adjourn.
Thank you, ma'am.
Second.
Is this her thing?